I'd like to make a couple of quick announcements, just housekeeping issues, please. The first one is there are microphones in the ceiling. That's why you do not see them in front of you. These microphones are exceptionally sensitive. If we have a side conversation, it will be picked up, even back here. Second thing I'd like to share with you is that this is being recorded, so that side conversation will be memorialized for all time. If anyone is using a laptop in the room and is logged into the meeting, can I please ask you to mute your speakers on your laptop or other device so we don't get that annoying reverberation, please. Restrooms are out this door, turn left and continue back. You'll see both men's and women's rooms there. If everyone could silence their cell phones, that would be appreciated. And I will do mine. And then I'd also like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Secretary for offering this facility to us. It's a lovely facility. Thank you for having us here. It's very much appreciated. I want to recognize the staff of Florida DOT who put a great deal of effort into organizing this and making sure IT is up and running, that we're ready to go, and particularly Roger over here who took this and just ran with it and is making us look good. I really appreciate that. So those are my announcements, and why don't we go ahead and kick this off. Commissioner Starkey will be with us in a few minutes. I believe there's some traffic.
No traffic. Traffic doesn't exist on a foggy morning. So.
No, not at all.
So this is a joint meeting
Yes,
of the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance and the Tampa Bay TMA Leadership Group. And so we actually have two chair people for this meeting. And on our action items during the business part of the agenda at the beginning, we'll actually have two votes, one from each group. And so I'd like to hand this off to the chair of the Tampa Bay TMA, Commissioner Oakley.
Thank you. I'll call this meeting to order. I'm Kimberly Overman. I'm the chair of the Board of County Commission, but chair of the TMA meeting, and I welcome all of you here today for the joint Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance meeting, as well as the TMA Leadership Group meeting. We do have some alliances we have to do today, and I'd like to take this time to ask those that are at the table to introduce themselves so that we have a good understanding of not only who's here that is part of the alliance as well as the TMA group, but other leaders in our community and stakeholders that have chosen to attend here today. And with that, I will start at actually over here with Brad Thoburn, who has joined us today. Please introduce yourself, sir.
I'm Kenyatta Lee. I'm the Chief of Motor Development for Florida Department of Transportation.
David Gwynn, District 7 Secretary.
Adelie LeGrand, Hart, CEO.
Morning, David Green, Executive Director with T-BARTA. Bob Esposito, Executive Director of Hernando Citrus MPO.
Jeff Holcomb, Commissioner in Hernando County. I sit on the Hernando Citrus MPO and T-BARTA.
Good morning, Ryan Kordak, Interim Executive Director with the Polk TPO. Matt Murphy, Council Member in the City of Newport Richey and on the Pasco MPO.
Mike Moore, Pasco County Commissioner.
Hi, Carl McKissick, Executive Director of the Pasco County MPO.
I'm on the MPO in Hillsborough County.
Good morning. I'm Harry Cohen, Hillsborough County Commissioner and Chair of the Hillsborough TPO.
Pat Kemp, and Hillsborough County Commissioner and on the TMA and Vice Chair of the Hillsborough TPO.
Good morning, Joseph Citro, Tampa City Council, and also a member of the Hillsborough County TPO.
Good morning, Dave Olbritton, City of Clearwater Council Member and Fort Pinellas Representative.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. I'm Janet Long, Pinellas County Commission. I'm on the board of T-BARTA, and I'm also on the board of Forward Pinellas in Pinellas County.
Good morning, I'm Whit Blanton. I'm the Executive Director of Fort Pinellas.
David Hutchinson, Executive Director, Sarasota Manatee MPO.
Commissioner Vanessa Ball, Manatee County Commissioner, and I'm representing the Sarasota Manatee MPO.
Good morning, I'm John Dingfelder, Tampa City Councilman. I'm on T-BARTA and Hillsborough TPO.
We go over to here.
Jack Mariano, Pasco County Commissioner, firstly, towards from South McKinley.
Excellent. Did we miss anyone sitting at the front tables? Okay, and if the folks in here would like to introduce themselves, you can start at this end.
Tim Everline,
Ryan Brown, City Manager of the Sarasota Manatee.
No Constantino, employee at DOT.
Chelsea Favero, Fort Pinellas. Amy Almore, Fort Pinellas.
Alexis Novak, Fort Pinellas.
Casey Dagenhart, Hernando Citrus MPO.
Andy Taylor, Legislative Aide to Commissioner Moore.
Derek Berger, Legislative Aide to Commissioner Stark. Stephen Benson, City of Tampa.
Justin Hall, FDOT District 7. Maine Gallup, DOT District 7.
Chris Cochran, Hart.
Danny Jorgensen, City of Tampa.
Wendy Micklin, City of Tampa.
Vic Fide, City of Tampa.
Karen Kress, Tampa Downtown Partnership.
Mark Reichert, the Executive Director of the MPO Advisory Council.
Laura Lawson, Commissioner Pat Kim's office.
David Chase, City of Pinellas Park Transportation.
Ron Weaver, Stearns Weaver Law Firm, Citizen.
Ray Shermonte, Sam Swartz, Planning and Engineering.
I'm Bill Roberts. I chair the Hillsborough County Citizens Advisory Committee, and I chair the T-BARTA Citizens Advisory Committee.
Chris Leffert, FDOT District 7.
Henry Queen, Tampa Bay Business Journal.
Rob Kersey, consulting firm Tyndall Oliver.
Scott Ferry, Pasco MPO staff.
Rich Moss, DOT District 7. Brian Pissarro, T-BARTA.
Dennis Heinbaugh, retired Center for Urban Transportation Research.
Hi, Harry Glenn, Van Squake Associates.
Matt Gelber, District 7.
Hi, Roger Rothschild, District 17.
I am Susie Emmer.
Frank Lewis, Pasco MPO staff.
April Pounds, FDOT Central Office.
Tania Corbin, Pasco MPO.
Sharice Kenny, HDR.
Jensen Hackett, District 7.
Jennifer Carver, FDOT Central Office.
And Cheryl Wolf.
Excellent, excellent. And we have about 46 or more people online, and we'll be here till tomorrow if we go through that as well. So I'm going to ask all of you that are online to say hello. Thank you very much. It's great to have you here. With that, I, as the chair of the TMA leadership group, I'm going to open it up for public comment. I have two individuals that have signed in physically here to speak, and I don't know if you have anybody online. Okay, all right, but the first person in person to speak is Mr. Ron Weaver. Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
May I approve?
Yes. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm Ron Weaver with Stearns Weaver Law Firm and a former chairman of the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce Transportation Committee. I bring you words from the Gatlin brothers and from Shakespeare. From the Gatlin brothers, I bring you something regarding the funding of transportation in Hillsborough County, which will hopefully be on the ballot again on November 2022. After a judge decides on January the 26th what to do with the $500 million that was collected pursuant to something that the Florida Supreme Court unfortunately found flawed with respect to the destination of the monies in the ballot on the Hillsborough County raising of a 1 cent penny sales tax. With respect to that $500 million, I bring you the regards of the Gatlin brothers and Shakespeare, that with respect to the Gatlin brothers, their best song, in my view, was that all the gold in California is in someone else's name. That $500 million is in a name that's to be determined on January the 26th by a judge in Hillsborough County. And while some of you are precluded from ex parte communication with that judge, some of you may have ability to help influence the destination of that money with respect to transportation urgencies, which is why I rise with respect to Shakespeare after the Gatlin brothers, that for Shakespeare with respect to November 2022 and a ballot item to restore that money and make up our transportation needs in this region from Hillsborough's perspective, to make it up in the air like a good airline pilot in St. Louis getting to New York on time by making it up in the air. We've lost 4 years on this flight. Therefore, we've got to make it up in the air in the next 30 years with a 1 cent sales tax on the November 2022 ballot, about which Hillsborough County, to their great credit, and many of them are here today, are having a workshop thanks to Gwen Myers, who has proposed that we have this 1 cent sales tax back on the ballot, fix the questions of the Florida Supreme Court with respect to the destination of the monies as to whether or not it's the citizens, which the Supreme Court said they can't decide. Statutorily, the county commission must decide the destination of those monies. So we respectfully suggest for Shakespeare that there comes a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune, but if missed, only to misery and despair. Our time has come, and I therefore respectfully ask that you join us in finding a way to make it up in the air, and that money not be in someone else's name, but be in the name of transportation with what we can do with respect to the $500 million already collected, and November 2022, refining our funding courage in the flood for this tide of men. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. I appreciate that. We've actually had a couple of folks that have joined us since Mr. Weaver got started. So I'd like to ask Ms. Starkey if you'll introduce yourself and also acknowledge that Commissioner Gwen Myers has joined us. And I believe.
Okay, I'm Commissioner Starkey, Chair of Pasco County Board of County Commissioners, member of the TMA and TBARTA and other things.
Thank you for joining us.
Clearwater Mayor Frank.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Anyone else that I missed?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Eggers.
Oh,
Wells County Chair and member of the.
excellent, excellent. Oh, online, we also have Brandon Gebert from St. Pete City Council has joined us also online. So thank you very much. I have a few more folks that have either signed up online, and then we have a comment that would like to be read online. The second person to acknowledge is Mauricio Rosas. Mauricio, go right ahead.
Good morning, board. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. I too rise to the occasion that the monies that were secured by the 1 cent sales tax should go directly to transportation. And I thoroughly support the 1 cent sales tax to be on the ballot for November. But I'm also wanting to talk a little bit about trains. I think that we are in a specific point in the development of this community, actually this region, where we have Amtrak in the very near future. It's going to have several daily, I beg your pardon, several daily commutes from Tampa going to Orlando, going to Miami, but it's the Orlando-Tampa corridor that's much more important. Then we also have Brightline that's going to be coming into Tampa. And we need to have regional connections using the train. So this is an opportunity. If we have to get into the idea that the infrastructure that we're putting in today is what's going to lead us into tomorrow. And I urge everyone here to please let us not just begin the conversation of trains for this regional area, but to actually begin to act on it. And I also ask respectfully, consider that Hillsborough County is the one who's going to be having to deal with the actual construction of the lanes, of the tracks, and it would not be a very good thing for the additional counties not to help us in this project. And I think the additional counties, what I'm referring to is funding. We should all be working towards funding so that not just one county is the one responsible for it, but the entire region is responsible for it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. I appreciate that. Next person to speak online is Chris Vella. Chris, you're recognized.
Mr. Vella an audio pin. He may still be working on that. In the meantime, would you like me to read the email that we received?
Right. We do have, I believe we have two emails, but one we have printed out here. They would like to read into the record, waiting for Mr. Vella to come online. Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. So this is from Naki McMullen with CFL4 Transit. It reads, good morning, members of the board. I'm writing this public comment to advocate for regional rail in Tampa Bay and Central Florida. Central Florida continues to grow rapidly. We cannot continue to prioritize our parking lots. We must invest in high quality mobility alternatives to cars. Frequent regional rail is essential for a more sustainable future. Local, state, and federal officials must coordinate to create dedicated rail corridors that serve the over 6 million people that live along the I-4 corridor. Elected officials should plan with Brightline to extend service to Tampa using dedicated right-of-way that can be utilized by public regional rail in addition to high-speed intercity rail. A rail connection between St. Pete and Tampa must also be prioritized to connect the two largest cities. Our organization advocates for transit in Orlando, but intercity transit connectivity is just as important as local transit. We support fast, frequent, and reliable transit for all, including regional rail, providing a realistic alternative to I-4. We understand these steps are unlikely to be completed anytime soon, but in the interim, we hope Amtrak service to Tampa will be increased to more than one daily trip, as well as hope that Amtrak service to St. Pete will be restored.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Bello, are you available now?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, yes. Please go right ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks for your patience. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Bello. I'm from Ybor City, 33605 in Hillsborough County. I apologize I haven't had a chance to go through the agenda, but I saw it very late last night and it looked really exciting because there's a lot of rail in there. But I wanted to take a pause and just step back for a moment. Our own TPO passed a resolution for environmental justice with transportation planning. I was able to provide some information about the expressway from the Summits Crosstown and how that was destructive. And of course, other people poured in information about the interchange and also I-275. With the resolution, what I really am hoping for is that we don't invest anymore into highway systems. In fact, right now, there is a conversation, I believe it was in Cradle Loafing, Lynn Blanton is probably there, where there was some discussion about removing I-375 ramp and allowing to have a patchwork of new development and connections in a neighborhood. We've started this conversation back in 2017 for Hillsborough County. And so we also got some MPO interest in that as well through the committees. And so what I'm a little bit concerned about is that we're trailing off of that conversation piece and just focusing on trying to get this interchange and also I-275 improvement done. It's a 25-year-old plan. Let me remind you that this project, TV Next, started back in 1996 with an MOU. It is completely irrelevant. And it's also irrelevant because we got Pete Buttigieg right now saying, I got money to remove the interstate system. And I can give that money to cities and counties. We have money for now for rail and transit. We don't have to invest in highways anymore. We already have the money to back it up right now. We don't even need AFT to do it. We have the money to back it up right now. So it's very important that we start to think more current and contemporary and not just talk about this 1 cent sales tax, but actually look and see what the feds are doing, look what the trends that other cities are doing. Craft out a plan for that now, and then think about the funding. Because what I'm concerned about is we're going to do a lot of little projects that are 20, 25 years old, and then general revenue is going to go through some really nasty projects like widening Lithium Pinecrest Road, for example. So you know that's going to happen, right, guys? I mean, commissioners, you know that's going to happen. So let's just try to think about today, now in the moment. I think we have a great opportunity. Of course, I'd love to see rail, and just on record, I do not want to see the rail go through the downtown interchange. I think that's a very bad idea. It's very costly. I most certainly support any type of local rail connection on the existing tracks with high-speed rail. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Bello. You are right on time. I appreciate it. That was 3 minutes almost exactly. And we do have another email, but I think we have someone else online.
I think that is it for our public comments online. I'm not seeing any more comments or questions. More email.
One more email. Would you mind reading that, please?
This is from Andrew Morris of Largo. In the Tampa Bay metro area, regional rail and intercity passenger rail planning and investment need to be done as a coordinated effort to maximize local, state, federal, and private funding resources, maximize utilization of infrastructure, maximize ridership, and help create a more connected multimodal network for the region. Brightline, Amtrak, and Fdot should focus on building a dedicated passenger rail corridor along I-4, Orlando International Airport, and downtown Tampa. Separating passenger rail and freight rail services between Orlando and Tampa most likely will be necessary to avoid capacity constraints on the CSX-A line. And previous intercity passenger rail planning efforts have recommended building a dedicated passenger rail corridor along I-4. The CSX Clearwater subdivision between Tampa, Clearwater, and St. Pete has minimal freight rail traffic, and it would be a good corridor for regional rail and intercity passenger rail. When planning infrastructure upgrades for the Clearwater subdivision, these upgrades should be focused on supporting regional rail between Tampa, Clearwater, and St. Pete and allow for Amtrak and Brightline to be able to serve Clearwater and St. Pete. The Sunrunner BRT would benefit greatly from high-quality regional rail and intercity passenger rail connections to it in downtown St. Pete. An aerial gondola between downtown Clearwater and Clearwater Beach would become an even stronger concept if regional rail connected passengers into it. As a coordinated effort, we can make regional rail and intercity rail a reality for the Tampa Bay Metro.
Excellent. Thank you very much for reading that through. And seeing no further public comment requests, I'm going to turn the meeting over to the chair of the Suncoast Transportation and Planning Alliance, Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
I left my phone at home, so I'm trying to get numbers in here.
Yeah, we're at the Alliance Business Meeting section.
Okay. But I'm not the chair.
Yeah, you are. Of the Alliance. Of the Alliance, you are. Really? Yeah, you are.
I did not know that.
Congratulations.
Thought I was vice chair. When you miss a meeting. All right, so I will follow this agenda then, and I'm sorry, I'm recovering from the flu. And I fell asleep at 8, woke up at 3. I got my 6 hours in, so I'm struggling here. Okay, so I would call for the approval of the minutes from June.
Second.
And actually, I have 3 approval. Okay, that would be 3A. A call for the approval. Oh, all in favor? Aye. 3B, approval of the minutes for the TMA Leadership Group meeting of September 17th, 2021.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. 3C, approval of the 22 meeting calendar.
And I can add to that, it's included in your packet. It's also shown on the screen. This would be our calendar for meetings in the coming year, please. We are seeking your approval.
Move approval.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? And then 3D, adjustments to the regional priorities for major projects.
Thank you
I
again.
had no idea.
So we have a PowerPoint to walk through the adjustments to major regional priorities. We can go to the next slide, please. So obviously we are a large region with a great population, and this coordination is vital to our success as a region. Next slide, please. As you can see, we have a very vast system here, a lot of road miles, the counties. Our population is not slowing down. We're projected to grow. So having this coordinated effort is going to be very useful to us as we try to then find a best and highest use for our dollars. Next slide, please. So we develop a set of regional priorities on an annual basis. This is our way of demonstrating our unified voice to support projects. And on this slide are a number of projects that have been funded because of our cooperative efforts here. And so this we can be quite proud of. Next slide, please. So we do have some unfunded priorities. This is the TMA group. So that is the smaller sub area of the region. And you can see these here. And they will also be displayed on the next slide as well. And on this next slide, the projects that are shown in blue are those TMA projects, in case anyone would be asking why you're seeing this at the time. This is for the larger region of the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance, the complete list. And this is, we're seeking approval of both lists from you, please. We can go to the next slide, please. So we will have to have this as 2 separate motions. I do request one for the TMA priorities and then another motion for the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance. And I'd like to have them in that order, please, because the TMA is a subset of the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance. Are there any questions, please?
Can you put those priorities back up?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I did want to bring up State Road 52. I'm going to ask Secretary Gwynn. This is an important road in Pasco County that needs to be fully funded, and one of our priorities. Are we set with 52 now, or do we still need to consider moving that into one at the time?
There is one stretch of 52 that could benefit from trip funds, trip matching funds. So there could be a benefit to adding it to the regional priority list.
So I think it's that last little piece. And
on most of it, I think, it's not maybe all of it, but it's just flexibility in funding, right?
so it would be advantageous.
Sure. So as it relates to the TMA list, are you suggesting we should add that section for the trip funding? Is that what you called it? For the remainder of the 52?
Yeah, it's just one little piece, but you know, we're a county of almost 650,000 maybe, and we have two east-west roads, imagine. And so State Road 54 is fully widened. We're in the process of widening 52 from a 2-lane road, and there's just this one little piece. I think it's from is it from the Sun Coast?
We have 21 we're running right now. We're going through the design process. One thing, of course, this last year going up a little faster. So at some point we may need to continue to supplement that. In trip funds, if this was on the list, it would allow us to access this another funding to try and fill any gap we would have.
So is it better for us to swap out State Road 54 and 41 for that this year and then move that back in next year? Which would you say is a higher priority?
I would say finishing 52 would be a higher priority. But
we're not quite ready for next year. Yeah. All right, so board members, if you don't mind, this would greatly help the citizens in Pasco and Hernando County if we just swap out those two.
Yeah, this is actually approving the TMA list, so we need to hear from the TMA members.
Sure, that's what I'm asking.
These changes.
We do have a separate transportation regional program priority list, and that could be a consideration would be to add it to that list. I don't think it's on the trip funding list. And that's why these organizations have been formed, because we're required to coordinate regionally on trip priorities.
So do it there and not here?
We could add it to both if that's the will of the TMA leadership.
I'd like to see it added to both.
Okay, well, I appreciate it.
Commissioner Long, would you like to comment on that?
Oh, no, I'm so sorry for butting in, but I just think that the more emphasis we have on our priorities, the more attention folks will pay, as well as our legislators who are looking closely at what we're doing, and as well as the feds. We're planning on pulling federal money down. So to me, it just makes common sense to put it in both places.
So any other TMA members would like to comment on this? Is there?
I'll agree. So we've got a lot of work coming up, and construction in another couple of years, so it would put us in a great position. I think it's just State Road 41 to Belling Brothers Road that can be done.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Mariano. Any other comments?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Morano. I am really concerned about that State Road 5441. So we're not obviously eliminating it from a priority in our mindset, but if it's a timing thing, it makes sense, and I'll agree with that as well.
Okay, does someone have a motion?
I'll make a motion to take the unfunded priorities list that shows right there and just add State Road 52 to the list.
We have a motion by Commissioner Jack Mariano and a second from Commissioner Long. Any further discussion? All approved?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
All right, so can we go back to where we were then?
So if we go to the next slide, please. This would be the larger region. So this would be a separate approval.
That would be the alliance's approval.
So it would be the full alliance. And obviously, we have, in addition to the TMAs, we want to separately add that addition to this motion also, please.
I'll make that motion.
You're on the alliance, right?
Do I call the question? No, I made the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who's your vice chair? Who's your vice chair?
I'm not sure what's going on.
Would you like to make the motion?
Yeah. Thank you.
You're- Go ahead, ask for a vote.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. Okay, so
That concludes this item. I thank everyone. So we'll move into our next item.
all right, the next item is adjustments to regional, no, we did that. Gulf Coast Safe Streets Summit 2021 report and save the date for November 2nd through the 4th.
That's my item. Thank you. I just want to first acknowledge the heavy lift that our staff did to put on the Gulf Coast Safe Street Summit. We had a lot of help and a lot of participation from the other MPOs in the region. We had over 320 people register. I felt like we had some really good speakers and really good presentations. We had Deputy Assistant Secretary for Safety Policy, Robin Hutchison from USDOT, and she gave some keynote remarks on the pending Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which then subsequently was approved, and made it real clear that she thinks this region is well poised to do well with funding in that program. This summit is an important way for all of the MPOs and local governments to come together to advocate for safety throughout our region. As you know, the Tampa Bay region is one of the least safe places for vulnerable road users, but well, just even people driving around in cars, we have a lot of problems with that as well. And so the more attention we can put on it, the more concerted our efforts and coordinated our efforts can be, the better. We will be having a Gulf Coast Safe Street Summit in 2022 hosted by the Polk TPO. So we're very pleased to pass the baton over to Ryan and his team, and we look forward to assisting in whatever way we can do that.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, now we're on the state passenger rail workshop. Sorry, pass that gavel back to you.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to thank Fdot for making this possible today. Many of us in many of our meetings, I sit on HART and now TBARTA and our TPO and now the TMA. And over the years, we've talked about what we need to do in order to help people all throughout our region get around where they need to go. And at our TPO meeting, I asked to get us all at the table so that we could at least not only understand what's possible, but also understand some of the steps and where it fits into each of our region's priorities and how we move forward in this. And with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Ms. Jennifer Carver to lead us through the state passenger rail workshop. Thank you.
Great, thank you for having us this morning and welcome to our discussion on passenger rail strategy. I'm Jennifer Carver with Fdot and I'll be facilitating this portion of our workshop. So the department has recognized the need for a new statewide passenger rail strategy, and we've embarked on an effort to analyze the role that passenger rail could play in enhancing mobility in the state by connecting residents with jobs, bringing visitors and to vacation destinations, and providing equitable, safe, and sustainable transportation options. So we're happy to be here this morning to can you go ahead to provide a little bit of information about our statewide passenger rail planning activities, to receive input from you all on this board on how Fdot can support passenger rail planning activities and identify potential collaboration opportunities. So our brief agenda for this morning, we're going to have Brad Thoburn, our Assistant Secretary for Strategic Development, kick us off with a conversation on our statewide transportation vision and how that relates to passenger rail. He'll talk about our vital few, the Florida Transportation Plan, and other planning efforts. And then we'll have Kenyatta Lee, our Chief of Modal Development, discuss moving from our vision into implementation and the department's thinking on our role in advancing intercity, regional, and urban passenger rail. And then we'll have some facilitated conversation on the topic. We'd like to keep this discussion at the policy and strategy level. And then Assistant Secretary Thoburn will close the meeting discussing our next steps. We do have some polling questions for you, some interactive polling questions that we'll get to try that out in a minute. Next. Just a few discussion guidelines. Your feedback is very important to us, so please, all the board members, please participate in the conversation. As I mentioned, we will be using Poll Everywhere to receive your input, and so everyone on the GoToMeeting and in the room can participate in that. We'll try that out here in a minute. And if in the room, if you wish to make a verbal comment, if you could help me out by tipping up your card, then we'll know who wants to speak. And remotely, we'll let Beth help us with that. And we are taking meeting notes from today's meeting, so we'll capture all of your comments. At one point later in the discussion, we will put our notes on screen so you can see that we're capturing them. So let's try out the Poll Everywhere for a minute. So next. So there are 3 ways that you can get into the Poll Everywhere. So you can use your phone or your computer. So go ahead and you can go to pollev.com and enter FDOT rail, or you can just take a picture of this QR code with your phone and it should take you right into it. And then if you don't have a smartphone and you're just using text, text to the number 22333 and then text the message as FDOT rail. So everybody take a minute and get in there. And then we'll try out our first question. Everybody looks like people are trying to scan the, well, let me know if you're getting in.
You need Wi-Fi to do so?
You shouldn't need, you can use your data.
Yeah.
You have to download the app.
I did the little square.
Try go to the next slide with the actual poll. So this is the first poll. So if you don't need Wi-Fi if you have your data on your phone. So people.
If you like to connect the Wi-Fi, you can connect the public guest. You can connect the on-ramp.
Are people here in the room able to get in?
Download an app.
Hmm?
Maybe you download an app.
No, you don't need an app. You can just go to the website if you use that.
Website again.
If you go to pollev.com.
Oh, I see the.
And then enter FDOT rail. Is it working?
I wasn't participating.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay. Here again. What do you put in? What's the username?
The FDOT rail. Yeah, FDOT rail.
We're all challenged here.
I think we're getting there.
You're getting there. That's all right. That's why we have our test question of which one of the following railroads was called the 8th wonder of the world.
There we go. Okay.
Are y'all getting in, or we can all right, well, we can keep moving because for those in the room, we want to hear from you in person. So so it looks like most people are answering Flagler Railroad from Miami through the Keys, and that is the correct answer. So let's move to the next question, which is which of the following best represents your affiliation, so we can get an idea of who's on the call, on the go-to meeting, and who might be in the room, who's able to get in there.
We do multiple choice here.
No, we just,
I got that one, that one, that one, that one.
sorry, for this one, we just gave you one choice.
All of the above. All the above? Yep.
Yeah, you could say other and all of the above. For this one, we only gave you one choice. We have some others later where you can answer multiple. So it looks like we have a mix of RPC, MPO, staff, city, county, some transit agencies, few state people. Right, and so now I'm going to turn it over to Brad to give an overview.
Thanks, Jennifer. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today, and I thank Beth for helping set this up and working with us to make it happen. And Commissioner Overman, appreciate allowing us to be part of this process and taking this opportunity. As Jennifer mentioned, we kind of have two meetings here, and this is intended to be sort of the high-level policy conversation of around passenger rail for the state. And I'm going to give that sort of high-level view of our planning and our vision for the state and how passenger rail fits into that. And Kenyatta is going to follow up with some more detail about some of our passenger rail planning activities. Obviously, we're focused on how to move people and goods, enhance economic prosperity, and preserve the quality of life and our environment and communities throughout the state. And so a big part of that, we've identified sort of three or really four core areas to help achieve those goals. One is to promote safety, enhance mobility, inspire innovation, and then attract and retain talent. And within each one of those, we have teams that have been created to really sort of try to identify ways we can move the needle in each one of these areas. And I think we talk about transit and rail clearly fit in a number of these areas, but especially as we look to move the needle on mobility, passenger rail and transit are a good way for us to reduce congestion, enhance the movement of people, and so forth. So not just thinking about moving cars and trucks, but people and goods. And so, actually, and as we look at developing passenger rail systems, potentially have the opportunity for us to look at innovative ways we can plan and engineer and inspire our workforce and develop key partnerships to promote mobility. And so in all those ways, the passenger rail is a key consideration as we look to create a robust multimodal transportation system, especially in a state that's growing as quickly as Florida. And, I think we always use the term 800 people a day, but I think in sort of the post-COVID world, it's accelerated. We're seeing a mass migration to Florida. We're not even totally sure where they're all moving to yet, but we're trying to get our head around that. And it will challenge us from a transportation perspective. So next slide, please. As we look at the overall transportation vision, we at Florida DOT, we are responsible for doing statewide planning. And so that entails developing plans that cover the overall vision for the state, but also modal plans for each one of our areas. That includes rail, of course, but also seaports and airports and space and so our freight systems as well. So we develop modal plans, and we also have, as you know, the strategic intermodal system plan. So our overarching planning document is the Florida Transportation Plan, and it's not the DOT's plan. I think you oftentimes hear us talk about it is the state, the plan for the state. And so we have a steering committee that involves members from all sorts of stakeholders, including the MPOAC, and MPO is represented on the steering committee, and then also our modal partners, including rail and transit. Some of the things that we focused on as it relates to the FDP this time is that enhanced focus on mobility. Again, thinking less about how the throughput of cars and trucks and more about people and goods. And so there's also a sort of a different kind of look at how we think about mobility from, just capacity to thinking more about things like travel time reliability and the quality levels of service within our transportation systems, and also providing interconnected services and modes and reliable connectivity between them. So when we think about passenger rail and transit, obviously as we see areas like Tampa area, Tampa Hillsborough and Pinellas and the region and East Central Florida, as well as Central Florida and South Florida, the growth is obviously creating new challenges for transportation and forcing us to think differently about how we invest in our transportation system to maintain efficient and reliable transportation. So when we looked at the CIS as kind of that the FDP is that overarching document, and we drill down and we get to the CIS, that's obviously the DOT maintains the CIS. We have a CIS policy plan that helps guide our investments in the strategic intermodal system. And so after we completed the FDP update, we've started working on the CIS policy plan, and that's policy plan has really been the update has been focused on things like providing greater flexibility, kind of defining what constitutes interregional, and ensuring that we maintain that we're providing statewide strategic investments, but we're also providing flexibility that we make sure we're addressing the changing needs in the various areas within the state. And so that policy plan will give us some capacity to better invest through the CIS in different modes, including transit and rail. We do have that ability today, but I think with the policy plan, we're gonna create some additional flexibilities in that regard. So, I would note that the CIS policy plan is actually, the draft is actually available online now, and we'll be taking comment on it through January 7th. And so I encourage you to take a look and provide your insights on that. One of the things I noted that we do have a variety of different modal plans, and except that in one area we don't have a modal plan is actually in the transit area. We have modal plans for all the other areas. So we're in the process of developing a statewide transit strategy. What we didn't want to do is create a big plan that sits on the shelf. We want to have a nimble strategy document that helps guide the DOT's role in supporting public transportation. Like a lot of our modes, the DOT is we're a funder. We maybe provide technical assistance. Sometimes we provide safety oversight and things like that. As the world of transit changing, we know that the department needs to be recognize the challenges facing public transportation moving forward, and that may mean we have to think differently about what our investments look like, what our technical supports looks like, and what we do as an agency. And that gets me to the last one, which is rail. We are actually updating our rail system plan, and we've just kicked this off. And the rail system plan is obviously not just passenger rail, it's both passenger and freight rail. I think we could generally say that in the past, a lot of the focus has been on the freight side as we thought about rail. And earlier this year, Secretary Thibault challenged me and our team in terms of thinking differently about what is the future for passenger rail and what's our place in supporting various types of passenger rail investments. And if you look at, Kenyatta is going to kind of cover this, so I don't want to get too far into it, but historically, our policy and our vision for passenger rail has been driven a little bit more by individual projects than a holistic vision. And obviously, Sunrail and Tri-Rail, and we've had iterations of intercity high-speed rail. We have Brightline that we're working with right now. So what we want to do is have a better framework for how we're proceeding as it relates to passenger rail, and that will include thinking about what our specific role is in urban transit systems, urban passenger rail, regional, and intercity rail. And each one of those is unique and different, and our role will be different in each one of those. So what we want to do today is get some of your feedback and thoughts about what our role can be, but also what the role of the cities, counties, and regions and different partners can be. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Jennifer, and then I know we're going to transition into a more robust conversation about what that role could be. So.
Thanks, Brad. Are there any quick questions for Brad before we move on to another poll?
Madam Chair.
Ms. Long, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. I'm very curious because I didn't hear you say anything about our partners at the state level. And it seems to me that unless we have a clear understanding of what their statewide policy is with regard to moving all of our citizens around, that's one of the most difficult things to deal with, because you see, and I've had these conversations with Secretary Gwynn, you know, between Jacksonville, Orlando, and South Florida, they are miles ahead of where we are in Tampa Bay. So how do we even out the equity and where the money goes?
Well, that's part of our conversation today is about what the role of the state can be in supporting the local communities and regions as they look to advance transit and rail systems. And so that's what, frankly, that's why we're here today. And you know, a lot of what we see, I don't know if I would say that Jacksonville, I'm from Jacksonville. I don't know that I think Jacksonville is necessarily ahead of where you are. But obviously the state's made significant investments in Sunrail and Tri-Rail. But both of those were, and this was something we'll talk about that Kenyatta will cover, but they were partnerships. And so that's part of what we want to talk about today is what does that partnership look like and how do you make it happen? Because there are lessons learned from what we did in South Florida and Central Florida that can help shape the way we proceed in other communities.
All right.
Follow up, or you?
I do, but I'll save it because it won't be good.
We do want to have time for
15 years.
Yeah, I agree.
At some point, we have to do more than have a conversation. It's got to be followed by action.
Understood, but the good news is we're here trying to do something just
Yeah,
exactly that. So that's a good
why
start.
I'm holding my tongue.
Any other questions for the Deputy Secretary? Please proceed.
All right, thanks. Let's do another quick poll on what are the benefits of passenger rail, and you can select your top 3 for this question. So enhancing mobility, enhancing the environment, promoting economic development, increasing travel options is getting up there. All right, so enhancing mobility, increasing travel options, and promoting economic development seem to be winning. Keep answering, and I'll turn it over to Kenyatta to talk about how we're moving from vision to implementation.
Thanks, Jennifer. First of all, to Commissioner Long's comment, the department is statutorily required to develop and implement a rail program to meet current and future statewide mobility needs. So that's part of the conversation that we're having today. And I know you're more actionable, so that's what we're going to talk about. So historically, as Brad mentioned, rail initiatives have been driven by individual projects, and our new approach is to focus on a long-range vision to drive our rail initiatives. Florida has 3 types of passenger rail systems: intercity passenger trains connecting major population centers, commuter trains providing regional mobility, and urban transit systems rapidly moving people from metropolitan areas. Our long-range vision will support each type and integrate them with local community visions. In addition, we must integrate passenger rail with other modes for efficiency, safety, and reliability. And finally, our public-private partners are integral to developing passenger rail strategies. I'll discuss these topics in context of inner city, regional, and urban systems. Next slide, please. Today, Amtrak and Brightline provide Florida's inner city rail services. Amtrak operates 3 long-distance services, the Silver Meteor and the Silver Star, operating between New York and Miami, and the Auto Train operating between Lorton, Virginia, and Sanford. They also operate a feeder bus service called Through Bus Service. Amtrak carried approximately 905,000 passengers in 2019. Although 18 stations cover nearly 423 miles of service levels are infrequent, often late, and travel times are not competitive with automobile travel. The Amtrak Connects Us plan calls for Florida improvements, and substantial funding is available in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I want to note that the Florida corridors are likely to be operated as state-supported services, as they are less than 750 miles in length, which means that Florida will be responsible for providing the annual funding to pay the operation of service. Brightline began service between downtown Miami and West Palm Beach in 2018. The Orlando segment is under construction, and an extension to Tampa is planned. Funding comes from the real estate development value capture, similar to a Japanese model. Their for-profit approach provides a high level of inner-city passenger rail. Fdot does not financially support their capital development, nor does it have authorization to subsidize Brightline's operations. However, Brightline suspended all service in March 2020 due to COVID, so service continuity is a concern from the public perspective. Next slide. Moving forward, here are some strategies that we want to consider as a part of us working internally with our team, with our passenger rail working group. We're looking at developing a model for delivering inner-city passenger rail service in Florida, leveraging the public-private partnerships, developing policy recommendations to USDOT regarding Amtrak service, subsidy requirements, and agreement terms. Required state support on routes less than 750 miles in length may be limited for many states, and lack the transparency for Amtrak's cost allocation model is a concern for us. Conducting a statewide planning to evaluate needs and opportunities for high and higher speed inner-city passenger rail connecting Florida regions. And then we're going to look at determining the public role in private systems and conditions for potential private-public partnerships, while preserving space in highway rights-of-ways and state-owned rail corridors for future services. Also providing funding for capital investments when leveraged with federal or private funding sources, and establishing a framework and standards for providing that funding support, and applying passenger rail safety and engineering best practices. Next slide. So today, Tri-Rail and SunRail provide Florida's regional passenger rail. The Tri-Rail commuter rail system was planned and funded as a maintenance of traffic project during the South Florida reconstruction of I-95. Fdot purchased the South Florida Rail Corridor in 1998 and opened it as a maintenance of traffic project in 1989. Due to its relationship to I-95, Fdot provided much of the funding and continues to do so today. The policy is set by the SFRTA board, including operating and maintenance decisions. 18 stations along a 73-mile corridor are owned by Fdot. And last year, well, not last year, in 2018, they carried 4.3 million passengers. It remains a challenge to transition Tri-Rail from a state-supported model to a dedicated local funding source. And there are also maintenance and state of good repair issues that we're facing today. Next slide. Like Tri-Rail, Fdot plans SunRail as a maintenance of traffic function during the reconstruction of I-4. Fdot purchased the Central Florida Rail Corridor from CSX, led development, and continues to support the project. Florida was able to secure full funding grant agreements from FTA, and local interagency agreements with enforceable commitments protect both the department and the local project sponsors. The project started in 2014 and currently operates between DeBerry and Point Siena through Orlando, and it serves 16 stations along a 62-mile corridor and 803,000 passenger trips in 2018 occurred on the Sunrail system. The Phase 2 North extension to DeLand is currently funded, and other extensions such as connections to Orlando International Airport are under study. Around 2010, Fdot requested from the FTA to break Sunrail into project segments to better match up with anticipated New Starts funds. After Phase 1 was completed, FTA could not consider both phases as one project because the line in the corridor was not contiguous. So Phase 2 qualified under the evaluation criteria. However, Phase 2 North, it could not qualify under FTA funding criteria as a standalone project. So the department creatively flexed FHWA funds and redistributed obligating authorities to FTA, providing the federal dollars to Phase 2 North necessary to keep the local funding intact. Looking ahead, it's critical to ensure a smooth transition of ownership and operations from Fdot District 5 to Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission. So that's what we're working on today and projecting that into the future. So next slide, please. So under regional passenger or rail strategies, we're looking at the planning and development and how we can support the projects and how Fdot leadership can navigate complexities for multiple geopolitical jurisdictions and support local technical activities and capacity. And also we're looking at ensuring regional and local funding mechanisms are in place to support long-term operations before project implementation begins, while acquiring right-of-way and strategic corridors, owning infrastructure, and maintaining state-owned assets when feasible. Also leverage corridors as assets to generate revenue for funding purposes. Additionally, we're looking at providing upfront capital costs, initial operating support, and other sources as we did with Sunrail and Tri-Rail. Assisting regions with obtaining access to existing rail corridors, and this may come under shared agreements and right-of-way acquisitions as well. And providing technical assistance to the local government partners to ensure that the systems are maintained in accordance with what we feel is a good state of good repair. Next slide. So this looks familiar. This is our urban passenger systems. So we have the Miami-Dade Metro Rail and Metro Mover, Tampa Streetcar, Jacksonville Skyway People Mover. An effective urban rail transit correlates with maintaining efficient throughput when roadways are over capacity or congested. Development of high capacity passenger rail systems requires semi or fully dedicated rights of way separate from vehicular traffic and traffic control systems. However, constrained corridors and urban cores can pose challenges to effectively integrating passenger rail systems within existing right-of-ways. So moving forward for urban rail systems, next slide. We'll look at supporting local partnerships with the planning and development of passenger rail systems and providing state oversight, as well as taking a lead role in evaluating the impact of urban projects on state facilities and balancing the needs of all modes and users. Providing capital funding support and initial operating assistance is also something that we're looking at evaluating. And providing technical assistance to local government partners to ensure, again, that everything's maintained in accordance to our standards. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Kenyatta. We have a few quick polls and then we want to move to some open discussion. So tell us, what are the challenges and barriers to passenger rail? And this is, you can enter a phrase or a sentence and it will show up on the screen here. You can enter 3 comments. So no local funding, CSX is a challenge, cost. You'll see the new ones pop in, funding. I'm seeing a theme. Funding. Now, if this was a word cloud, the word funding would be getting larger because it was the one everyone's saying. First mile, last mile connections. Cost, funding. Okay. All right. Long-term operating cost. It's a new one. Local funding. All right. All of the above. Okay, let's move on to the next question then. Last mile support system, so first mile, last mile. And then the next question then is what can Fdot do to help address these challenges and barriers? So as Brad mentioned, we want to start talking about roles for the department and different roles. Money, expertise, operations funding, preserve existing rail corridors for future use, marketing the benefits of rail, helping build consensus, prioritize passenger rail as part of the strategic intermodal system network, regional consensus, speed up the funding timelines. Okay, acquire right away. Funding transit operations, coordinate a strategy. Convince the locals that rail is beneficial to their community. Be an active partner, not a passive partner. Right of ways dedicated to rail, moving away from road construction. We heard that earlier. Negotiating with CSX. Funding corridor preservation, lots of ideas here. Hope we'll have some discussion about that. Developing a regional model for funding, put funding where their mouth is, promoting safe, clean, equitable transportation options. Negotiate with CSX, okay. Discuss with state and federal officials to improve funding of inner city passenger rail for state corridors. Make it part of the CIS, collaborate, okay. Let's move on to our last polling question, and then we can have some open conversation. Okay. Let community lead. Okay, go to the next one. So this has been about Fdot's role. So for those of you here in the room and on the meeting, what is your role in passenger rail? And for this one, you can select all that apply. So your choices are community visioning, planning and development, system implementation, funding and financing partner, operations and maintenance, or other. So lots of people working on planning and development, community visioning. Okay. Funding and financing partners, system implementation. Okay. Great. So what we'd like to do at this point is open it up for some conversation and questions if you have them for Brad and Kenyatta. And as we mentioned earlier, tip your table cards up, and we are going to show some on-screen notes. So if you can switch to the notes so that you can see what we're getting down as our notes. And let's see, I saw over there, how should we handle the discussion? Would you like me to recognize people or?
Please.
Okay.
Please do.
Sir?
Thank you. I'm only going to talk about my little part of the world, which is the city of Tampa. We have a population of 400,000, which will double during the day when commuters come into our city for work. They come from Pinellas, Polk, Pasco, Manatee. They come in every day to work. And now we have Brightline coming. It is coming. The terminus, the terminal, the ending point will be in Ybor City. We need to start thinking about the future now, and we need FDOT's help with that. We need a multimodal hub So the commuters coming from Lakeland, Plant City, and the mom and dad who are coming down from Disney with 2.5 children and luggage in tow will not be just dropped off. That multimodal hub will be the hub for HART, which will take them to other parts of our city, to the CSX rail line, which will also take them to other parts of our city. But something that has been discussed at MPO, now TPO, for the last 35 years, and its ranking in the priority system has gone up and down and up and down, is rail for this multimodal hub to our airport. Our Secretary of Transportation with the federal government, Buttigieg, is saying, we have funds for you. FDOT has been saying, we have funds for you. But with operation, maintenance, and staffing, the local organizations have no funding. So I've asked now for three things: a multimodal hub, rail from downtown Tampa to our airport, and some assistance with some sort of funding. We understand local government has to show some skin in the game. We had a wonderful 1 cent sales tax that was thrown down. Again, I'm asking for your help and seeing if we can have this multimodal hub and move up the priority from rail from our downtown to our airport, which will in turn hopefully get the rail from Pinellas to our airport also. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Commissioner Holcomb next.
So comment and a question, and I agree with the councilman's comments, but I grew up in the Baltimore, Washington area, okay? You would never in your right mind not drive to the city of Baltimore. There's work, play, entertainment there. You would never in your right mind drive to Washington, DC, okay? The system there, you'll end up on a one-way street going the wrong way, guaranteed, if you drive to DC. So they have a great metro system there. It's 91 stops, 760,000 people are moved around in one week, and it covers 117 miles. People take public transportation because it's painful to do otherwise, okay? We all drove here in a car today. No one took a bus, right? I heard some comments from the citizens, we need to stop working on our highways. That's wrong, okay? We need our highways for beyond our lifespans, in all honesty, okay? So we need a system that is going to alleviate our pain. And I haven't seen anything in detail, and maybe I'm still new to this. So I agree to your multimodal, and if it's at the airport, I think that makes the most sense. But how does someone in Hernando County who wants to live in Hernando County and work at MacDill, how do they get to MacDill with public transportation? How do they get to the airport? Maybe that's step one, get to the airport, multimodal, whatever we call that again. And then maybe from step two, we go, okay, how do we get from the multimodal station to MacDill, to downtown, to Ybor, to the stadiums, the Rays Stadium, all of those places. So I think we got to start with step one, and I agree, Councilman. Let's get people from everywhere in the region to one central location, and then from there, how do we do it? Is it above ground transportation? Washington D.C. has the benefit of going underground. We don't have that benefit. It's got to be above ground. It's going to be buses, whatever, But we got to get people from the region to one place. Maybe it is the tourist who wants to, go to Disney for part of their vacation and come to here for part of it. Get to Clearwater. But I think to sell it to Hernando County, why would you get on a train starting in Brooksville, as this document just showed us, to go to the airport? Maybe it's just to the airport, but maybe you want to go to work in MacDill, and it's got to get you there in a reasonable amount of time. So, I think to your point, Councilman, I agree, but then how do we get to MacDill and maybe 3 stops in between there? Or how do we get to downtown from the airport with multiple stops along the way to USF? All the different places you can live, work, and play.
Thank you. Commissioner Mariano, and then Commissioner Moore.
Thank you. I just passed out this colored map. It was shown back in 2016 for all of us to see. And Bob O'Malley from CSX came before us in the back 2 pages where it says Brooksville sub, that runs all the way from Brooksville down to ConAgra site down in Tampa. The next line runs, I believe it's USF area, up and around Rosemar, down to Clearwater, down to St. Pete. That's what was brought to us as far as available lines, meaning they have very little customers on it. Their best lines to give up on their whole system. I was very disturbed actually looking at the agenda item coming up on the next agenda item, the map that we're shown. The next agenda item shows a map of all the lines I've got. Well, CSX clearly told us 5 years ago, these are the lines we'll give up. These are the lines that don't mean as much to us. We can negotiate on these. So for 5 years between the region saying, yeah, we'd like to see it. I mean, the TMA group, when they heard it, everybody got excited. They said, this is the thing, this is the thing. And I'll say, I was thrilled to see Hillsborough, Commissioner Overman, coming forward to say, we want to go at least start our section. But CSX is not going to give up just one section. These are the lines they'll give up, and this will give us a regional. So when DOT talks about Brightline coming in after going through Miami to Orlando and then coming back over, great. But let's go build this, because when that line comes in here, just as Councilman Citro said, we're going to have them coming in here, and then where do they go? Well, not only can the region work and benefit, and every beach that we have on here, every big high improvement center, we can have that infrastructure in place to get to those last, I'll say 100 miles that we want to connect to. So now that we know Brightline wants to come in, now that we know you've got all these people in this room, in this table, excited about what's going on, let's get DOT at the table to go work on getting these 2 lines, and let's get this thing started. Thank you.
Pasco County Commissioner Mike Moore, thank you. And I'm glad we're here today. I sat on T-BARTA back in 2014. Commissioner Long and I sat together on that. And I remember the first meeting I ever had, which was at the T-BARTA office. I think it was off Cypress down there. It was close to the steakhouse. What's Charlie's Steakhouse, right? Close to there. And we got our first presentation on BRT. And next to me was the St. Petersburg mayor, Mayor Kreisman. And they showed us this grandiose BRT that was going to come. And it cut out Pasco County, it cut out St. Petersburg. And we both looked at each other and go, what is going on here? So over time, I said on T-BARTA, I'll be honest with you, I thought it was useless. A lot of my time spent there, waste of my time driving every day. I'm glad to see things are somewhat moving forward now. But I say this because we're talking about rail. But for all these years, we've talked about BRT. And typically, or should, I should say, BRT should probably come before rail does. But we can't even get that done. You need to see what the demand is or help create demand. I mean, and buses can be moved based on experimentation. Rail cannot be. So I sit here, and I listen, and just like I did on T-BARTA, and wonder why, after all these years, we're still talking about BRT, but we can't even make that happen. I know why. It's called parochialism, right? We're not thinking regional. And we have so many regional groups. We have the TMA, we have T-BARTA, we have the Regional Planning Council, we have MPO, we have this, that, and the other. This is what we should be doing. Not all these groups. So until we can get BRT done, I'm just being honest, how are we going to get this done? We look at Sunrail, obviously what's happening with Sunrail. I mean, they still can't cover the cost. And after 7 years, the cities and counties were supposed to take it over. They can't take it over. Who's going to step in? My point. Can we get BRT done? Can we widen 275 in Hillsborough County and put lanes in to make BRT happen? That's what I got for you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Blanton, and then Commissioner Long and Commissioner Kent.
I'll be real brief. Well, first of all, we do have BRT under construction from downtown St. Pete to the beaches.
And that's not part of this region we're talking about.
We've always envisioned that to be the first leg of a regional connection. And if the regional rapid transit project goes to move forward, that would tie into downtown And that would link up with Pasco County, and then you'd be able to go from Wesley Chapel to the beach if you wanted to do that. So your point's well taken, but we are, somebody's got to start, and we started. The point I wanted to make, or at least ask, is from a statewide perspective, are other state agencies beyond DOT engaged in this passenger rail vision? I remember when we had growth management. Growth management wasn't great for a lot of local governments, but it sure incentivized good behavior at the local government level. And the federal government in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act now is providing a linkage between housing that's affordable, job development, and transportation investment. And I think if the state is going to be serious about a regional or statewide rail vision, we need to make sure Department of Economic Opportunity, Department of Environmental Protection, resilience, sustainability, all that is wrapped into that. I know that's not what the legislature is right now, but I just want to ask, are we coordinating at a statewide level among the state departments or state?
That's a really good point, and we did coordinate. Like just from a process standpoint, to let you know where at least we are with this effort. Those stakeholders are all involved in this statewide bill plan. Our conversation on the passenger rail side kind of it started out very internally focused. It was about, okay, what can our role be, kind of reevaluating what we've done, looking at our organizational structure. And now we're at that point where we're saying, okay, now we got to get out and talk to stakeholders. So this is actually almost like a trial run for us in terms of stakeholder engagement. And we get to the next steps, I'll kind of give you that path forward we're looking at, but it involves much more intensive engagement with stakeholders throughout the state. And I think your point, even though they're like those agencies are in the statewide rail plan, we might want to have them in more of a focus on the passenger rail side, because certainly some of them have more of a and can have an impact or have an interest. So it's a good point, but I just want to make sure you understand. This meeting is actually the first of many, and we're using it as almost as a test case to shape the future engagement.
Commissioner Kennedy, Commissioner Overman.
Thank you very much. These comments that I'm hearing are so, they're so interesting because it's very clear everybody has a different level of understanding of what's been going on in this region. Commissioner Mariano, this map that you so eloquently spoke about was produced that I've seen. I came to Florida in 1972, and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council did their first transportation study, and the vision was all there. So from 1972 until now, pretty much it's a rewinding of the same old. And what we're really talking about at the end of the day is changing a culture away from hopping in your car to go everywhere you want to go. And unfortunately, Commissioner Holcomb walked out of the room, but I understand where he's coming from. His county is much different than Pinellas and Hillsborough. And we can't build any more roads in Pinellas. Hillsborough has a lot of room to build roads, but that's not the future if you want to make decisions today that are going to carry our kids and our grandkids forward. Because if you do the planning, and I know there's a lot of planners in the room, they'll tell you that Commissioner Holcomb's area is as well as Pasco, and Pasco's seen it in real time, the growth up there. I mean, that's just part of everybody wanting to come to Florida, right? So, on top of all of the issues that we all know a little bit about, nobody wants to talk about the political will. Because back in 2006, when I first was elected to the legislature, CSX was a big deal. And the Republican leadership wanted that rail line. That was their number one priority to bring home. And I couldn't vote against it because it had so many opportunities for high-paying jobs. So we passed it. Guess what? We got the federal money. And then did everybody remember what happened? The governor decided that we didn't need it, didn't want it, and sent it back. And now that $40 billion went to Salt Lake City. And they have a magnificent system today. So, you know, that's real, and we have to deal with that. And we have to ensure that we do our jobs at the local level to show that this is what the state of Florida needs. Not for today. We're not making these decisions for us right now. We're making them for the future. Maybe we need a visioning session of what we want this area to look like 50 years from now. Because the way transportation funding works, look how long it takes to put that money together. And I went to an APTA conference about a month ago, and it was very comforting to me to hear that the feds are very aware of how the funding formulas need to change to keep up with the way technology is changing how we deal with transportation. So they're working on that, and they want feedback on what do we think they can do to help us, because they're a big component of it as well. I can wax on, if you all know. I have
All right.
one more thing. Whit Blanton, my Forward Pinellas director here, he doesn't like me to talk about this so much, but he shared with me a little visual many years ago when we first started working together about how the other major seven at the time, major areas in our country have managed to do exactly what we're trying to do here today. And it was so visually, it was like a lightning bolt, because one of the ones that leapt out at me, please correct me if I'm mistaken, was Atlanta, who's made up of something like 26 different counties. 26. We're talking here about 4 or 5, maybe 6 at the most that we're talking about. In Atlanta, guess what? They have one MPO. You think that makes a difference when you're talking with one voice and one message? So when you want to know what the hiccups are, I always go back to that chart that Whit showed me, because there are several others. Talk about it. Whit, you know better than I do. Denver, I think. Out in California, they did it. They did it in Texas, was it? See, I remember some of that.
All right.
Significant. It is very significant. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, for crying out loud. There are better ways. And if we keep on doing it the way we've always done it, we're going to get the same result. We'll be here 50 years. Well, you might, but I won't. But it'll take that long again before we get to where we are today.
All right.
Sorry for my outburst.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Kemp, Commissioner Overman, and then Commissioner Starkey. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very excited we're here today. I have been talking about this actually as a citizen activist since 2013, and went around as an elected official since 2016, December of 2016. I had been in touch and talked with CSX for many years ago, and they actually had, and I know when this was first raised, I think it was Commissioner Mariana and I who kind of tried to get some support within the group that wasn't there at the time for, and I'm not even sure because I'm on the TMA and TBARDA and TPO and so many groups, and they've all gone through this plan many times. But I just like to, because I know earlier there was a lot of mention of MacDill Air Force Base, and I'll just say to you that one person who was a particular advocate had said to me, and wasn't supportive of the CSX tracks, it said to me, the number one route we have, it's getting people from the university to MacDill Air Force Base. And I just want to say within the region, and that this map, if you stand at 30th and Fowler, right at the university. You can look across. You can stand on these CSX tracks that are there right now and being used, and you can look across right at the University of South Florida. The right of way goes into Temple Terrace. You bring it down, and you can go into Ybor, which was mentioned. Then it goes across to downtown next to the art museum. Then the tracks, which I'll say that CSX, and they said they were available in pieces to use in pieces. I mean, that these are, for the most part, these are very underutilized tracks, far more underutilized than Sunrail was in Orlando. These tracks go from, as I said, Ybor to downtown Tampa. You can follow it straight down here across South Tampa. For anyone who lives there and knows that they see those tracks all the time, that those go straight to MacDill Air Force Base. So you can go from MacDill to, on tracks that are already built right away that already exist, from MacDill to the University of Tampa, to downtown, to Ybor City, go north up through the most transit used, the most transit riders in this entire region, anywhere, exist between downtown Tampa and to USF, which is right where the tracks go. We're lucky about that placement. Then you go across and you can see them next to Bush Boulevard. That little leg that goes down there, south, there goes into the airport. Now, I know it's a freight into the airport, but it's used every day into the airport, as I understand. I've talked to the person who does that train. And so that just shows you the accessibility, even if we had to enter it somewhere else to TIA. You go across, you go through the Odessa area with where it has right there at the border where it's urbanized area has the most, has 12,000 homes there or developments or places for people to live, residents, but 40,000 jobs right there at where Hillsborough and Pinellas meet on the line at that. Goes down into Safety Harbor, and guess what? It goes across to Clearwater. So you could take Clearwater and get to Tampa Airport today on a line that already exists that is dedicated corridor. You go down from Clearwater and you take it across what I understand to be through Pinellas, the most jobs-rich region of Pinellas, right along the tracks there. And the tracks end in Pinellas or in St. Petersburg. And if you go look in St. Petersburg and you go, you won't believe it, but to the Rays Stadium, and you look around the Rays Stadium, you're going to see the tracks right around the Rays Stadium. I don't know. To me, they look like they're in good shape. They're right next to the sidewalks there. So this is an incredible opportunity for a dedicated corridor right of way. In Orlando, Sunrail converted their tracks, as I understand, and I've mentioned this several times before, at $20 million a mile for the right of way, the tracks, the stations, the locomotives, about $20 million a mile. And right now, the I-275 work that we're doing is costing about $120 million a mile. So as much as people say, about this, I just think it's about the cost of rail versus, at least in capital costs of our roadways. I think it's an incredible opportunity for a dedicated corridor, which for us to not take that opportunity would be a real miss on our part. And it's just where I've been. And also I'll just say, in terms of Brightline and maybe being here in a decade, we're not sure, but Amtrak exists today. People don't seem to even know it, but from Tampa to Orlando goes only once a day. I understand there's an opportunity for it to go 3 or 4 times a day, which would be wonderful. And it's the same speed, by the way, as what people are calling high speed, but it's no longer high speed, the Brightline connection. I'd like to see that started right away. But I'll just throw in those comments about the opportunities that we have. And I think they're really great and wonderful. And I'm pleased that we're talking about them.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll move to Commissioner Overman. I did want to remind you all that at the next portion of your meeting is a discussion on the regional rail. So if you have comments on what Fdot's role should be in the passenger rail, we'd like to focus on the policy aspects of that.
Thank you. As many of us have been interested in this topic, I moved here in 1984 from the Washington, D.C., where the Metro actually opened the year I graduated from high school. So that was a little while ago. And what I learned living in that metropolitan area as it was deciding to expand its urbanized passenger rail options and connecting to the regional connections between Washington and the Baltimore area, New York, and then Boston, I got a better feel for how this connectivity is critically important, but you do stage the conversation. Kenyatta gave us a good understanding of the three different areas. And to your point, Commissioner Mariano, yes, why are we looking at this when we're looking at this? Well, prioritizing this process is important. And the good news is we're starting to actually talking about it, because we actually were sort of suggested that there wasn't any reason to talk about it about 10 or 15 years ago, because as Commissioner Long mentioned, we couldn't get past the politics. So I think at this point, it's a good idea to look at both of them. Isolating, not necessarily this one, because that one's way too complicated, although it's grown up and helps us understand the different line names and the different sections that CSX actually owns, because CSX will only negotiate the whole line from what we have been told in the past, possibly. So understanding the different pieces of a puzzle is helpful. Recognizing our opportunities with these two maps is wonderful. Recognizing how those two maps connect throughout the whole region is how we get there. Because if we don't, for example, help Fernando understand why it's important to take a look at the Brooksville line, they may not understand why it's critically important to the citizens that live in their county that actually work in my county, in Hillsborough, or in Pinellas. And why, if they are stationed at McDill, why it's important for them to have connections to the region. We all know we have more housing permits per day than we ever imagined was possible. We're building people in this community and moving here faster than any one of us ever anticipated. And every day our roads fail. Every day there's an accident, especially this week with all this fog. Every day our highway systems fail to help people get where they need to go for longer than we want them to. What's nice about rail, whether it be urbanized rail or regional rail, is that it's on a rail. It does, and the accidents don't typically happen at the same frequency that cars do, because there's really only usually one driver, thank God. So the good news is, the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because we do have to not only conceptually agree that we want to move forward on this, but two, look at what our assets are. Because my primary concern, given the land values, is that right-of-way protection. If we have lines that are not being effectively used for freight, for example, those lines are at risk of being lost, because we're going to start encroaching on those right-of-ways that don't make passenger rail and regional rail possible. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. But to answer some concerns that were brought up by Commissioner Moore, the reason Hillsborough is having difficulty accepting the idea of rapid rail is because of the economic justice associated with what we experienced in Hillsborough County in the 50s and 60s, where we destroyed the urban core of our communities. and divided them. And those communities are still trying to recover. So the good news is finding a balance. It's not an either or, it's an all. But we still have to prioritize how we move forward and where our partnership helps deal with the things that we don't have, which frequently is the ongoing local funding to do the operations once we get started. And without the commitment by the local communities, as well as the state, taxpayers, and our legislature, we will not be able to move these things forward. So we have to get on the same page. And I'm really encouraged by what I've heard today, because I think we are there. I think we have partners we need to bring to the table to help us get there. But I think we can get there if we recognize what our motto is, which is, what does this say? One region, one voice. The Western pregnant Florida, as I call it, region, I believe is committed on making sense about how we help people get around. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you on this. So thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll have time for Commissioner Starkey and.
Just follow up on that.
Yeah.
One of the things I really appreciate your comments, because one of the things that, and Commissioner Long talked about Sunrail and some of the previous activities and when you were in the legislature and how that project came forth. And one of the things that was sort of a key lesson learned for us was when we look back at Sunrail, was that was their number one priority. They had the business community behind it. They had strong support in their legislative delegation. They had folks positioned in their legislative delegation to make it happen. And so all those things really, so you talk about prioritization, that's the first, and to us, that's the first step. It's really hard from the department's perspective to program and provide funding if there's not a clear set of priorities that, hey, this is where you want to go. And if we keep hearing different projects and there's not a priority, it makes it harder for the department to engage as a partner.
So I think we'll have time for Commissioner Starkey and Mr. Hutchinson, and then we'll need to wrap it up because we want to give you time for your regional rail discussion. So if that's all right.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and be brief. I also serve on my MPO, the TMA, and TBARTA. I'm the Pasco County representative for TBARTA. And I am very glad to see all these people from the Tampa Bay region here who are concerned about transportation. And yes, my county is growing like crazy. And as I mentioned at one of our previous meetings, in the month of October, we issued more. This is not a brag. This is just a fact. I don't know if it's good or bad, but we issued more single-family home permits than anywhere in the United States of America, any municipality. So, and I know Commissioner Holcomb mentioned they were up till 2 in the morning at one of their commission meetings because,
11.
Okay, oh, I've been telling people it's 2.
11 hours.
But change is coming, and you know, our citizens, we're working as hard as we can to bring jobs to Pasco, but they are coming down here to Hillsborough. So, at TBARTA, 4 of the 5 counties have decided that BRT is the fastest way and the most efficient way and cost-effective way to move our citizens around in a regional way with BRT. And BRT is a new, I mean, it is one of the leading edge ways to move people quickly at a reasonable cost. And isn't that what we want? I talked to our Senate president yesterday on a different matter, but this came up, and as Commissioner Long mentioned, we don't have state support for kind of stuff, and we do have state support for BRT. I am a rail user. I love to travel. I travel the world, and I ride rail all the time. And when I saw this rail line, I was excited because it hits most of the key places. Now, Commissioner Holcomb mentioned that your population is really more to the west. And, you know, we're working on a BRT on 19 that I think could help solve that issue for the existing population density in Hernando. This rail line will come up through the middle of Pasco County. That's great. The BRT will hit Wesley Chapel, really our one-day urban core. So it's It's not going to take one thing, it's going to take three. And we have a solution on the table that Tallahassee will fund and that our county is willing to fund, and others have said they're willing to fund, but we are blocked by Hillsborough County. And so I'm very frustrated. I feel like Commissioner Moore that I'm wasting my time sometimes at TBARTA, and I see sometimes why our legislators talk about getting rid of it. I am committed to finding regional solutions for transportation. But I just wanted you to hear that we have one ready to go. We're moving forward with it, but we're going to come to a point where the breaks are going to happen, and I don't want it to. I am jealous that you got your piece of it going in Pinellas, and maybe we'll start talking about doing it on our 54 quarter, because we're going to have to. We only have 2 east-west roads. We're going to have more options. But, and I am a fan of rail, but I don't want to miss the opportunity that we have a multimodal solution sitting at the table right now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Hutchinson, and then we'll let Brad wrap us up.
Thank you. I just would suggest on your state strategies, approaches, that you, learn from the state's experience with systems approach, and maybe model some of the policy strategies after the interstate system versus the local transit system. And what I'm really talking about is for at least the statewide and regional rail strategies, you add ongoing operational funding to what you will be strategizing about, and not just initial startup funding. If you built the interstate and then turned it over to each local jurisdiction to maintain and operate and pay for, we'd have kind of a hodgepodge mess, I think. And I think that ultimately, if we're going to have a rail system, the state's going to have an ongoing operational role.
And some of the strategies that we're looking at, as I mentioned in the presentation, that is something that we're concerned about. We're learning from implementing other systems and trying to better it as we go along. So the next version of it will be a lot better and understanding lessons learned.
Well, that's exactly what I was commenting to. And I would hate to have my comments have taken the place of our 2 elected officials who had their cards up. So I don't know if there's a way to get their comments.
Do we have a few more minutes to hear the comments, or?
Well, I just
like to hear.
I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. First of all, Commissioner Long was talking about 50 years from now. I have to tell you that inside Hillsborough County, in the city of Tampa, we are at the breaking point already in terms of people's ability to move around and in terms of the level of congestion that we need to relieve. I shudder to think of what it'll be like in 50 years if we don't start moving faster. And to the rail discussion from Commissioner Kemp, it's such a phenomenal opportunity. It's been sitting there all this time. Who is CSX supposed to talk to? Who's supposed to be in charge of the conversation? Who has the authority to actually negotiate with them and, start to make a plan? We hear about what's available, but we never seem to get beyond the point of just talking about, the blanket availability. And so that's one thing. And I will tell you, to her point, inside the city of Tampa, these tracks are underused. They also come with huge amounts of right-of-way around them that can be used for all kinds of things, including recreation, and there just doesn't seem to be any kind of coherent plan of who is going to be in charge of actually talking to CSX. In terms of this BRT discussion, which I think the 2 things are not mutually exclusive. They're 2 entirely separate things. I hear the frustration of the regional partners, and it's definitely a major issue in the room. But we are at the center of it. And we're the only ones that have neighborhoods that are actually on top of some of the areas that would need to be expanded to have it happen. And they're historic neighborhoods, and they're neighborhoods that feel very preyed on by expressway expansion in the past. So we have to be able to balance those interests, and there's other interests too, historic preservation and, you know, environmental issues. We have to be able to balance that interest with the greater good. I'm not on T-BARTA. I have not seen the plans directly. My understanding is that a lot of this can be accomplished within existing right-of-way. But, you know, I think that there needs to be an understanding on both sides of what the resistances are, and that's the only way that we can work toward some type of go-forward plan on this. But the truth is, we need both. We need them all, because we are strangled with cars that cannot move around anymore. And just to end on Councilman Citro's earlier point, if what happens in downtown Tampa continues, and it's wonderful, I mean, it's huge. There's jobs coming in. We're a huge tech destination now. People are coming from all over the world to move here. But if it continues, you are literally not going to be able to move. So we've got to find a way of getting some kind of multimodal center down there that can bring people in from all over the region and then disperse them out again. That is the only way that we're going to be able to function, I think, going forward.
Thank you.
Can I just real quick? Two things. Number one, on CSX, my experience has been that CSX will talk, but they don't want to dedicate resources unless they perceive there's a real project. And so if you're not into, you know, doing a feasibility study or into PD&E or something like that, they don't perceive it as real, and they think that that's just consuming their time. So that's just something to think about as you go forward. And that's, I'm not saying that's the right thing or not. That's just kind of the way I think they operate. The other thing is, I don't want my comment before to be perceived that you can only have one project. You have to have priorities. Miami-Dade has 6 projects within their SMART plan. Now, they haven't been great about setting priorities, and it's created challenges for us. They're not all going to get done at the same time. So they're going to get done based on what phase of completion they're in, whatever. So it's not, so, and that may not be the best answer. So that I just want to make clear that it's not like you just get one project. It's just set priorities, advance projects through the project development process, and then, you know, tee it up for funding. That's the key. And then once you do that, then you will see, I think you will see CSX engage.
Commissioner or Councilmember Dingfelder and Commissioner Eggers have had their cards up for quite a while, so if we can go to them quickly.
Thank you. I think that in this COVID, post-COVID environment, the elephant in the room, I believe, is demand. I was just Googling up what's happening in some of those big cities we're talking about in the transit. In DC, initially their transit ridership dropped 95%. Right now it's leveled out at 85%. In New York City, 65% drop. In Atlanta, 65% drop. I don't think those are numbers that we should disregard, and I hope the DOT is working with our economic analysts and that sort of thing to try and sort out what the future is. And I don't think it's just about this health issue. I think clearly it's about working from home and a change in the mindset of not only the business, but the employees. The other thing they've seen in some of these larger cities, the largest cities, is that, and it's obvious, you know, that the service workers, and these articles mention the Black and Latino areas, they're still riding. They still have to get to work because they can't work remotely in a lot of these service jobs. So what does that point to, Adelie, you and your counterpart in Pinellas, et cetera? That points to local, that points to buses, and also to the BRT. So I've been a huge supporter of rail and transit and that sort of thing for 25, 30 years in Tampa and regionally. But now maybe the ballgame's changing a little bit and maybe our focus needs to change. Now, with that said, I love the idea because hopefully it looks like tourists are still coming to Florida, and I think that's critical to all of our economies. So, and I think with that said, I think the Brightline and the regional and statewide stuff, I think is really important. And I hope that that works coming down I-4. And I think that will help in many ways. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that elephant in the corner that I don't know that we've been talking about very much this morning.
Okay.
Really good point. I mean, at the end of the day, to get a project funded, you're going to have to go through the ridership analysis and demonstrate that it's going to have a cost benefit. So, and the current circumstances post-COVID are challenging ridership. So that's certainly something to consider.
Thank you. Commissioner Eggers, and then we'll,
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
Well, I'm glad we're having, this is a great conversation and I'm glad we're doing it. And to those who wanted to do it earlier, I'm glad you keep reminding us we wanted to do it earlier. I'm glad we're here today. We're going to move forward with that. 3 quick points. I think leadership and organization and prioritization and speaking as one voice is critically important. Secondly, I don't think things are mutually exclusive. To your point, that's exactly what I had written down earlier. We need all solutions on the table and part of that prioritization. And the third thing is it goes to a little bit to the demand equation. But if you go back 30 years, 15 years, 5 years, I have not one resident that comes up to me and all the things that we talk about that talks about this kind of stuff. If you start talking to them about, well, it's a little congested, it's a little this. I think FDOT does a great job of outreach. All the technology that you brought this morning about polling and visioning and all of that needs to be transmitted to our public in some fashion. Start getting some engagement from our public, more engagement, not when we just have a decision point. You know, I'm not going to get into Tampa Bay water, but I will say this. We talk about drinking reclaimed water. At some point, we need to have that discussion and education today to do that in 20 years. It doesn't happen overnight. Our residents won't stand for it. We need to be having this discussion and engagement of our public. So that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And
we are actively engaged with the Florida Public Transportation Association. So we work with the transit agencies across the state. And we're talking about doing some type of marketing campaign to have the citizens understand about why the transit is important and how we're utilizing that to facilitate transportation movement.
And I think that's great, but then we like to hear from them why they think it's important.
Yes, it's a part of the campaign. Yes, not one way, it's going to be 2 ways. So we need to understand the campaign's working.
it looks like we have one last commissioner. Thank you.
This is the first conversation that I've sat in on rail, and I found it very interesting. And I wasn't going to say anything, but just by sitting here listening to all of you and knowing most of you and the areas that you represent, it seems to me that we need to be looking initially some of our larger cities, Tampa, Orlando, our larger cities really need to be looking at intercity rail. We've got to start somewhere. We can't do everything all at one time. I would love to, but no one's going to have the money to be able to do that. So we've got to start somewhere. And that means that our larger cities need to be taken care of because they're the ones really getting hit so hard right now. When people come into their cities, how do they move? How do they get anywhere? The roads are terrible. I mean, I will tell you, I live in Manatee. I go to Tampa. I'm in Tampa. You know, it's terrible. It's worse than Manatee, if that's possible. That being said, the rail needs to start at our largest cities and then work out. Once we start doing that, we're going to really see what paths we need to take as a group, all working together to cover the other areas. I'm looking forward to the next conversation because I think that's very important. I remember my friend Janet Long brought it up. I remember when the funding came in from Tampa to down I-4. I remember that, and I remember when the governor pulled it. Yeah, I remember all that. So, it is something that we're growing. We need to take that path. So good conversation, but we need to start with our big cities, I think, and reach out from there. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, I'm going to wrap up with kind of just a reminder of the next steps. And we do have an opportunity for people to send in comments to planning@dot.state.fl.us. So you can email comments. As I mentioned before, this is the beginning of of the effort to get input on the state's role in passenger rail as part of our update of the statewide, the state rail plan, which will be done in December 2022. So we've got a year ahead of us as we develop that rail plan. In the meantime, though, we are going to look at actionable steps in passenger rail before we wrap that up. I do want to remind everybody that the Cis Policy Plan is open for comment, and the Cis Policy Plan does have significant changes that will enable us to advance transit and regional systems. And then, again, this is our effort. This is part of our effort to really build lines of communication. I know I heard the frustration of this has been going on for 30 years. We need to get to actionable steps. And I'm very sympathetic to that. I may be new to the conversation, but I appreciate the fact that there's some frustration there. And we want to be a part of helping you move to that point where you can take actionable steps that have consensus and are prioritized. And so we look forward to being part of this ongoing discussion. We'll be back as a part of this regional or the passenger rail effort, because this was sort of our test run in terms of a workshop. I think we're going to learn a lot about how we can frame it. I think we kind of moved into conversations of the second part of this, but it was a good conversation and it was valuable for us, even if we got a little bit off track. And so I don't mind that. And then lastly, we like to end all of our meetings with a safety message. So I think that's my next slide, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Just remember, we've done a lot of work in terms of putting dynamic envelopes out to really provide greater clarity in terms of where on state roads at rail crossings you should not be. And so note, when you see those dynamic envelopes, do not enter that and stop on those envelopes. That's not a safe place. And so again, we're always looking to improve safety, increase safety, and obviously during the holidays, we want everybody to be especially careful and make sure that everybody gets home safe. So with that, I think we're ready to move to the next phase of this, or the next meeting, I believe.
Assistant Secretary, Strategic Development, I was looking at your card, so if you've got a title there that's longer than I'm able to say, but I want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here today and going through this with us. I think it's critically important that we start this conversation. And what I'd like to do is get a consensus this afternoon, because it is that close to afternoon, from those stakeholders that do serve on the Suncoast Planning Alliance as well as the TMA, to see if we could maybe work with the schedule we just approved, March 11th, June 10th, September 23rd, and December 9th, as target dates for potentially reconvening part of this conversation, or subsequent to those meetings, and make sure that we stay on track, because I don't want to wait till next year and then suddenly get to December when you're needing to do your strategic plan. We also have, I know many of our various different agencies are working on our individual strategic plans. So I think having this a target date scheduled would be valuable. Commissioner Starkey, are you okay with that idea?
Keep the conversation.
Exactly. So if we could shoot for the Friday, March 11th, does that work? Commissioner Marion. Sorry, I didn't see that.
It's okay, and I'm glad we're talking about the schedule upcoming in March and all, but I thought part of the reason for this meeting today was getting everybody in the room to talk about what's coming up. So this region's got two very strong people in House of Representatives and Senate. If ever we're going to try to put something together to what we want to do, now's the time to say it. And I think, as it's been said, it's not just one thing we need two, we need three. But if we need a strong voice right now today before I think we leave this room. If we're going to get behind BRT, we need to say we're going to get behind BRT. And I think everybody in the business community was pushing that so strong, so hard to make sure we went that way. That's the easiest one to go do, to go. The maps that were here, and then maybe this miscommunication from years ago in 2016 when they presented the TMA, but when Bob O'Malley was here from CSX, the two lines that say Tampa area rail lines are the Clearwater sub and the Brooksville sub. Those two lines, I thought, maybe I'm misunderstanding, so if anybody heard it differently, please say it. But I thought they told me because those are the two most underutilized lines, they'd like to work with those. When I saw Hillsborough coming forward to say this past year that you guys wanted to focus on your section, I said, great, I want you to go do that. Not to dissuade BRT, but to go make that happen. At the same time, in the conversation that happened, I thought we needed to get all the MPOs together, with DOT together to go together to negotiate with CSX. So I'm delighted to see FDOT here because you guys, if you're going to talk about a big plan for the state, you need to be at that table with us. Not just our regional guy, but our state guys who've done this stuff before. So I think before we leave the room today, if we're going to go BRT and CSX negotiation, we should be talking about that today, what's coming up in up session. And then in Tallahassee, I think we should even take a day for these groups together to say, we're going to go take a day to go lobby in Tallahassee to get something done.
Very good point. I'd like to follow up with that because we do actually have on our priority list Hearts project to negotiate with CSX, but
Right.
And then we also have the regional rapid transit on I-275. So they are on our list. We are committed to both of those projects. Having Hart be the only one at the table negotiating with CSX, I see is being challenging. So if you'd like to make a recommendation of a suggestion of support for that list and those two projects, I would see that as something that should be heard. Oh, well, that's up there. Okay. So would you like to clarify your motion, sir?
I put a motion together, we support BRT in the CSX negotiations for the lines. CSX said they were making
For the Clearwater and Brooksville lines?
Yes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any opposed? Let's just go there. All approve?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We have spoken to Tallahassee and to the state that we're really interested in doing this. And so I look forward to having a further conversation in March to follow up on how we get that done. Does that answer your question? Excellent. Excellent. Any other comments? Any other items on the agenda? Madam Chair, would you like to?
Are you saying we're done?
I think so.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going.
Oh, no, we're not done.
Yeah, I thought we had another section.
We have another section.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more. But an important section, because I still want to understand the difference between heavy rail, light rail. In my mind, heavy rail is what the CSX line is, and it's light rail that moves around within a city, at least in my experience. So I'm looking forward to the next discussion.
All right, that's a perfect segue. So I'll take it from here. And my job is to tee up a couple of follow-up items in our region that we want to bring to you. One from TBARTA and another thing that we might do as the Suncoast Alliance to move forward this conversation. So next slide, please. And I'm going to be just going over a little bit of where we've been and where we're going. Why are we still talking about rail corridors? I think we all have talked about this morning that it's about not getting stuck in traffic, and with the rapid development, we have fewer and fewer opportunities for right-of-way to move people. Next slide, please. And in the public engagement for our regional long-range planning that we did over the last few years, this has continued to be a high priority for our residents. So this was in the Tri-County area led by the TMA.
Next slide, please. Nearly 10,000 respondents to this survey, and the top rated elements for their transportation plans on the far left there, statewide rail and rail local/regional. Those were the ones that got 5-star and 4-star ratings. Next slide, please. We've also been talking here about Brightline coming to the region and how do we connect to it. We have started coordinating with Brightline about where that spot is that the terminus is going to be in downtown Tampa, and how do we connect it to everything else. And certainly the connection to, for example, the T-BARTA regional rapid transit concept is one that would be affected by where that Brightline station might actually go. So this is something that we're going to need to continue to monitor, but it's definitely something that you all have brought up as a reason why we need to be looking at those transit connections from the core to the rest of the region. Next slide, please. Commissioner Mariana stole my thunder. I was going to bring back a bunch of the slides from Mr. O'Malley's presentation to us back in 2015. But this gives me an opportunity to just highlight a couple of the things Mr. O'Malley shared with us at that time. So CSX's priorities, as they stated, safety, capacity, liability, and compensation are the ones that he put on the table for us to be thinking about in our conversations with CSX. Next slide, please. There were some key points here. You've already brought up several of these. So the Brooksville subdivision and the Clearwater subdivisions were the ones that he put on the table for a negotiation, specified that DOT must be involved. Again, this is CSX's position as stated in 2015. As with Sunrail and Tri-Rail, DOT or the lead local agency must own, maintain, and dispatch the corridors. So I thought that was an interesting one because they're not interested in continuing to own the corridor and running the dispatch. They would want the commuter rail system to own and dispatch the service, which is good. You know, that means that we are not going to be delaying our commuter passengers behind a freight train that gets stuck somewhere. Mentioned that only complete subdivisions will be sold. CSX must retain freight rights to serve freight customers on the lines. And then the second to the last bullet, I think, is important. The passenger system must be compatible with CSX freight operation. Light rail cannot operate on or adjacent to CSX rail lines. And that has to do with vehicles being crash worthy. So it needs to be a heavy duty vehicle if it's going to operate in this same line. What that means for us in looking at what our BRT opportunities are in this region is you could transform a freight rail corridor into a BRT corridor if it's no longer being used for freight at all. If you're going to take up the freight track, not going to run it anymore, then you could convert it to a bus rapid transit lane. And their position also is light rail or streetcar crossings must be grade separated. I think we're doing something different in downtown Tampa with the extension of the streetcar. So obviously this is CSX's position. So this is what we're going to need to be thinking about in negotiations. Next slide, please. So coming back to what do we mean by crash-worthy vehicles?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Were those conditions the same as what happened in South Florida? Just curious, with Tri-Rail? That was the CSX line.
Kenya, do you know?
Yeah, I think they generally are.
It'd be interesting to know, make sure that they're the same.
Yeah, we'd have to go back look, and I do know that leadership has changed at CSX, so gotta go back and make sure that this is what they're still going to tell you.
Right.
So generally, those 4 principles that you showed, that it's not just CSX, and but like Sunrail was a little bit unique in that they've retained the freight rail rights, but part of the agreement was to divert freight rail between S line and A line, and some of the proceeds from it were used to support
the enhancement of the freight rail corridor to divert traffic. So, they're all, each deal is kind of a little bit unique in that regard. So, but that I think, your comments about what they'll allow on the corridor are still accurate.
Thank you. Okay, so crash-worthy vehicles that can share track with freight rail. There's an example here in lower left corner. This is a diesel multiple unit vehicle in Austin. Of course, Sunrail similarly, and those vehicles are even larger. So the difference between like the Sunrail commuter rail cars and a DMU or electric multiple unit vehicle is that the latter are smaller, they're more nimble, they can accelerate, decelerate more quickly, they can take tighter corners, but they're still crashworthy. So it'd be similar, closer to a light rail service, but not actually going to a light rail vehicle because you couldn't put a light rail vehicle in that freight corridor. The other thing that I wanted to point out on this slide is cost ranges. The cost of putting passenger rail service between downtown and USF was most recently estimated by TBARTA as part of the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. And that was the second highest regional transit project in the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. It was estimated there at $54 to $69 million a mile. This was a couple of years ago. By contrast, Sunrail, that initial estimate was 10.7 million a mile. What we see looking at projects from around the country is that cost ranges are all over the place. And what we're going to need to do is a deeper dive on the ground assessment of what are the conditions in those corridors to figure out what our costs are really going to look like and what's realistic. The right-of-way acquisition for Sunrail. Mr. Thoburn mentioned that some of the cost of the Sunrail project was for relocating the freight rail traffic to a different rail line, making improvements on some of those other subdivisions. So the actual cost for the right-of-way acquisition, which is up here, about $150 million, that comes out to about $2.5 million a mile. So if you are calculating what a price with CSX might look like, we need to factor in both, does the freight traffic need to be relocated somewhere else or not? And if it does, that cost is going to be higher. Like if you factor in the cost of relocating the freight rail, it's $7.5 million a mile. But if you're just looking at the acquisition, it's 2.5. Next slide, please. And as we pointed out, there's low usage of several of the CSX segments. This, of course, just looks at Hillsborough County because that's what we pulled. But CSX, of course, is not going to give us the numbers of how many freight trains they're operating. But fabulously, the Department of Transportation, is collecting data where those rail corridors cross state highways of how many trains are crossing at those points. And so we just map that out to get an indication of what that corridor use looks like.
Poor Tampa Spur, 1 to 6 a week.
Oh, yeah, poor Tampa Spurs. We should negotiate about that one too. Anyway,
Look at the Brooksville subdivision, once a week.
1 to 3 times a week.
I've never seen it. I've never been stopped by a train.
It's crazy.
And you could go all the way to Manatee County on the line that goes
Once or
south.
twice in your life? Yeah.
They
should be giving it.
No, Port Tampa, that's McDill.
Right.
Port Tampa Spur.
Right. McDill is on the south end of that Port Tampa Spur, the pink one.
Once a week, right.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, why haven't we made more progress with transit? We talked about this a lot. We have a lot of planning studies, more than are on this list because I did this list several years ago. Next slide, please. Why haven't we made more progress? Okay, so there's 2 important parts of making progress with transit, right? Number 1,
pick a good project, which is what all of those planning studies were about. And there's a lot of great projects, which is why it's great news that we don't have to have just one project. We could have 6 like Miami-Dade does. We've got lots of good projects. The problem is with point number 2, we have to have local funding and a financially stable agency. So, so these ratings, this is the previous version of the New Starts rating program with the feds, but the new one is not a lot different. So you have ratings that are about picking a good project, and then you have the green ratings that are about your financial commitment and your financial stability. And that is a significant part of the rating. And if we don't address problem number 2, it doesn't matter how many plans we do. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question right there? Would it be possible?
Yes, please.
Thank you. With regard to the question about financial stability, I would like to know, of the county commissioners that are sitting at the table today, do you have transportation in your general revenue listed?
You can break it down.
Is an overpass. We fund transportation projects. We're building Ridge Road out of transportation impact fees.
Do you mean transit when you say transportation? Do you fund transit out of your countywide funds? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay, and I worked very hard to have that happen in Hillsborough County. And for 2 years, I got $2.5 million, and then that was cut. But we have our new administrator and our new county commission, and we've just committed to $15 million of countywide general funds to support what I think is the most top priority in the entire region, our operations and maintenance facility.
So the
in
reason
Hillsborough.
I point that out is because
Yeah.
if you don't have a specific funding source, then you have to take it out of general revenue. And part of that, I think, is answering the question, what is the purpose of government? And in my mind, when I ask people that question, it's very interesting what they would say. But if you consider that the purpose of government is to take care of those things that citizens individually on their own cannot handle, and what is the price you pay to live in a civilized society? If public transportation isn't in that list, that's part of the reason why we don't have what we need. Because I can tell you, having traveled, and I know Commissioner Starkey has as well, over many parts of the world, there is no transportation, public transportation system in the world that is not subsidized. So when we hear people or politicians or whoever it is we're talking about, talk about, it's too expensive, we can't afford it, that's not what government is for, I think we have to rethink, why do we have government in the first place?
Ms. Long, you make a very good point. And Hillsborough County does have $500,000 that we invest in our transit agency. And then we have made batch decisions. But because most of our general revenue that we put towards transportation has been for roads and infrastructure for the most part, and we have a significant deficit, Hillsborough County is going to be in a situation where the only way we would be able to try to create that revenue stream that you're describing that is so difficult to meet when it comes to the ongoing operations that our transit agency would be required to do to operate a robust transit system in Hillsborough County, is not there without a surcharge. And that's part of the reason why, we're all quite miserable right now, to tell you the truth. Not that we don't want to move forward on any of these transit-related agencies, but we just got the rug yanked out from underneath us 3 years ago, and we haven't figured out how to put one back. So we're almost there, but we're going to have a conversation about why that is so important, as you pointed out, and then how to move forward with some success if that revenue stream is there. Thank you for bringing bringing that up.
We hear the rest of the other two presentations.
Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that you raise, and one that also I think we don't understand exactly. And I tried to get that question answered for all my years, 5 of them as a commissioner, whatever else. And I think it's really important to understand that in the entire state of Florida, there's only 2 counties that fund their transit agencies with their ad valorem tax.
What is
Pinellas and Hillsborough. And that has made us the most underfunded transit agencies in the state. Our 2 agencies, other counties all over the state, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Gainesville, Tallahassee, where every other county, and I've looked into this, they fund it through initially totally, and sometimes totally through their countywide funds, as you said, at the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. They haven't had a sales tax. Orlando still doesn't, or Orange County. And so we fund it with our ad valorem tax, which means in Hillsborough County, when I first started there 4 years ago, our ad valorem tax was $36 million. It's now like $44 million. We have $500,000 only. You all have $750,000 that you've been able to raise it to. We can't even get above $500,000 unless we do a referendum, by the way, in Hillsborough County. State law allows us to go to $3 million, but the starvation funding that we have had for our transit systems in Pinellas and Hillsborough are extraordinarily dramatic. And I don't think people understand how extreme our underfunding is. And we didn't ever have to use that. I've always maintained it should be a floor, not a ceiling. In Hillsborough County, we have frequently, during the first part of my being a commissioner, we used it as a ceiling. And I would have liked to see us start to contribute more of our countywide general fund, as, literally, there are hundreds of millions of dollars in other counties that have been used to create a robust transit system. And we have this unique funding, uniquely chartered. And we are also unique in that, as I understand it, that we are not a county department in either of ours. We have independent transit agencies. And we're not, but the other counties, when they do that, I think take more responsibility about their investment as a whole, and recognizing that important element.
Thank you. I have one more comment, and then we have 2 more slides. And
a question in case, because we've had problems having a forum in the past, in case we were to lose forum, is there an action item that you are hoping to get board approval for to move forward with something in the rest of today's agenda?
There are 2 other items on the agenda beyond Ms. Alden's presentation. We have a short presentation from David Green regarding the rail corridor assessment project that you're proposing and the regional needs for 2050 for Pinellas. I don't know, do we need an action item on that? No, okay.
Beth, are you talking to this slide? Are you done? Is this part of your presentation? It is. I could wrap up quickly.
Okay, well, let's proceed with that, and then we can hear from Mr. Green.
Thanks. And I'm just following out kind of the logic of our conversations that have happened at our meetings in the past. And so one of those was that as we're looking at a financial commitment for regional transit, that we can't neglect our bus systems. It can't be at the expense of the local bus systems, which are already not funded to the level that they need to be. And expanding those bus systems is pointed at by our partners as one of the most important ways to improve access to jobs. Better local bus systems will also support and feed into whatever regional transit system is there. So we have to have both things. One can't be at the expense of the other. Next slide, please. Our TMA chair had asked me to include this last slide, which is just a timeline for these major projects. which looks at the number of years that we need to be in development to get a project like this underway. And it is several years, although we have the opportunity to shorten it potentially by going through a small starts process. That definitely, we need to get started now on a project.
And to that point, when I first saw the timelines on how long it takes to do these kinds of things, that's when I started saying, do this now. Because that means 12 years from now, if it's a very large, robust project, we might have what we all want yesterday. So this is an important slide for understanding the funding, the decision-making, and the planning that it takes to get a robust transit program moving forward. Thank you for showing us.
Now we have Secretary Gwynn.
I believe we have David Green is from TBARTA is going to give us an update on the rail corridor assessment project.
I guess I could officially say good afternoon to everybody now. This really is a great workshop. I'm happy that we could all finally get together and have this conversation, and really happy with the turnout from you all who were able to show up today to have it. Again, I'm David Green, Executive Director of TBARTA. I don't have a big presentation for this morning, but I do have this graphic, which I think everybody had noticed in the packet already, which is a map of Tampa Bay, and it depicts the CSX rail corridor that exists throughout it. And as has been pointed out already this morning, the rail corridor has been discussed in Tampa Bay for decades, and interestingly is a topic that's been brought up at some TBARTA board meetings recently over the past several months. It sounds like Hillsborough is very interested in rail service, particularly from downtown Tampa to the USF area. As Ms. Alden pointed out, that was a project that was identified back during the regional transit feasibility plan. But that particular section of corridor is only 10 miles of the more than 100 miles of rail corridor that exists throughout our region. Also, as was pointed out, any conversation with CSX is going to have to involve conversations about all of the relevant subdivisions. So the question then becomes, if rail service in fact makes the most sense in Hillsborough County, what are the other possible options everywhere else? So TBARTA is interested in doing an assessment of best uses of the rail corridor throughout our 5 member counties. It'll be a mode agnostic study, which basically means no assumptions will be made going into it as to the type of service that makes most sense everywhere. It could be rail, but it could be something other than rail in other places. From an Fdot perspective, they have always said that they are more than willing to work with anybody on a rail corridor-oriented project when one is presented to them, but they're also going to have to know exactly what that project is. And this study will help provide that clarity. Our plan is to work with our stakeholders, the MPOs, the transit agencies, on developing a scope of work, and then to issue an RFP to hire a consultant in early 2022. The project schedule and cost obviously will depend on the final scope of work that's developed, but our priority would be to complete the work as quickly as we're able to. And the purpose of mentioning this to you all this morning is, number one, to make sure everybody's aware of our intent, and then secondly, to solicit any input or feedback from anybody who's interested in making any, whether that be now or after the meeting concludes today, over the coming weeks, as to the scope of work, or again, provide any comments at all. So I will pause and open it up for any comments that anybody wants to make.
Commissioner Mariano, I knew you were going to go there. So.
So when I saw that map in our presentation, that's why I pulled out to get these other maps to involve. Go look at everything there. There's a massive study going to cost a lot of money. A lot of time. And I said before, as Bob O'Malley from CSX back 5 years ago came before the TMA, says, these are the 2 lines we're looking at. Brooksville, Clearwater, those 2 lines is what's available and we can work on. We don't use the lines a lot. It'd be most economical to go with. I would like to see if we're going to do that, focus on those 2 lines.
Brooksville and Clearwater?
Yes, and if Hillsborough at the same time says, you know what, we want to take that line all the way down to McDill or wherever the connections are that you guys have in your city as well, add that to the mix. But let's keep this simple and let's do it fast. We saw how long the timelines are.
Commissioner Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to ride Commissioner Mariana's coattails a little bit, but I want to go a little more in depth. As we sit here and have these discussions and we think about the future and moving forward, what you should be doing is a total cost assessment on this rail line. Because eventually, each and every one of us are going to have to go to our constituents and say, this is how much it's going to cost. Are they going to buy in? We're going to, this is going to be a big sell. Now, if everybody decides to move forward with it, you're going to have to sell your constituency on it. So what don't we do before we go this far down the road? Why don't we do a total cost assessment in everything? What is it? What's it going to cost you? We talk about the road acquisition, the acquisition of the tracks, or the poor conditions of the tracks on that CSX rail line. So you're going to get them up to standard as well. And I think I see Secretary Gwynn, nodding his head. They're not ready. They're not to the standard of passenger rail by any means. I think you would probably agree, Secretary Gwynn, right?
Yeah, and I think you've heard a few times today, the cost of the right of way is one thing.
Yep.
But the crossings, all the crossings are going to have to be looked at and see what we have to double track certain areas of it. Do we have to completely replace the tracks based on what we want to do with it? And so, although I understand the desire to get in there and talk to CSX, but it's like buying anything. If you go in there way in advance and you talk before you know exactly what it is that you're trying to buy, they're going to entertain your discussion, but are you really going to get, to me, it seems much more productive if we figure out what we want to do and have a better handle of what we want to buy, because they'll come back with their demands at that point. They'll come, just like they did on Sunrail. I mean, there was a lot of costs that weren't shown up there that had to be done to upgrade the system. So it's not that simple. And, we would need legislative approval to purchase, and they're going to probably have those same questions. What do you want to purchase it for? What are you going to do with it?
How much do you need to spend? What's going to cost you? So I that's just my opinion. I mean, you need to do it. You have to get it. You have to do that. You have to do that because, again, like Secretary Gwynn just said, again, if you want legislative approval, it's just not a rubber stamp. How much does it cost? Now, again, because Pasco may be, okay, great, or Hillsborough may say great, Pinellas may not. It doesn't, we all may say no. But until we know the cost of the taxpayers, which is what matters most, don't get ahead of yourselves.
I want to echo Secretary Gwynn's comments because we have kept CSX engaged throughout the process of us doing the passenger rail study. And these are the things that they were asking questions about and making sure that we know who exactly was going to be in charge from a local level. And then also trying to figure out what the project was going to be. They want to focus on those elements of it. So they know they don't want to spend money doing studies on their side. So it's kind of, we really need to have a finite list of what we're asking for before we go in there with that conversation.
Commissioner Mariana.
Commissioner Moore, I agree with you 1,000%. You're right on the money. It's not just I'm in line, but you got to negotiate with them and find out what their demands are, what they want. If it's going to be eliminating freight, it's going to be probably minimum. If it's not eliminating freight, it's not. And then if you do the feasibility in the line, there's no freight fault whatsoever. Maybe it's a simple thing with Taro is there, put in brand new stuff to make it a lot easier, where you can maybe do other things. And you may even look at more land use development around it. But the first thing I think we need to do is CSX still interested? What would the number be? How would they set up parameter A where they still get some freight? Maybe parameter B not. And then we dig into the feasibility of what can we put in there then, where to go. But again, to complicate the matter of looking at everything, I think you just start zone in on what they said is available already. And kind of working from there. But again, I agree.
Isn't that what you said many years ago? But nobody really came to the table to talk.
Well, I think there's confusion about what is the next step to take. So let's go find out. Let's go to the table. And now the DOT is at the table, T-Bar is at the table. And Hillsborough, like full speed ahead. Let's go take a look at this. I think we can all come together and say, let's go look at the numbers. But you got to start with CSX, I think.
Give me the numbers.
Yes.
So I think this is a great direction this conversation is going in, but I want to step back and ask the same question again. Who will lead the discussion? Who's going to be in charge of this, of sort of making it actually happen and be empowered to sort of be the I don't want to say the person moving the ball, but the entity moving the ball, because we're all representing different entities here. And someone or something, I think, has to be empowered to bring it all together and put it together.
And then in my mind, we have T-BARTA. It's the 5 counties that rail line that we're going to study goes through. That's T-BARTA's existence is for transit. So why would it not be in T-BARTA?
I would say it's a combination. if I could just say.
And with DOT, absolutely.
T-BARTA has state standing, but the MPOs have federal standing. The MPOs are charged with setting federal
And
priorities.
I'm on my MPO.
So
Are you on your MPO?
I think the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance that convenes this organization has absolutely got to be the convening organization to establish priorities with support from T-BARTA. And then we tell the state what our priorities are. And then it's so great to have the state at the table, because 6 years ago, we did not have that level of support from this district.
I don't know why every MPO doesn't have a representative on T-BARTA. And then what?
Well, we are.
Okay, but how many people are on the CSTPA? I don't know. I mean, maybe there's committees, but we make it too big. I don't know, but it seems to me every MPO should be represented on T-BARTA and make it simple.
I just want to say, I don't think we can maybe solve it here, but I think ultimately there's going to have to be someone or something that's in charge of carrying this briefcase.
I feel like T-BARTA was created specifically for a project like this. This is truly a regional project. And T-BARTA is the agency that should be able to pull it together and move it forward.
Hello, and I want to hear from my fellow commissioners. What do you think?
Madam Chair?
Yeah, well, that's me.
Oh, you're not chair here, chair there. I don't disagree. You need to pick, and you're 100% correct. You need to pick one agency or one group that's going to be in charge. If it's T-BARTA, it's T-BARTA. But pick somebody. Make a motion. Put them in charge.
One more presentation.
You know, well, you do, but we're having this conversation now.
I will call on Mr. Dingfelder, then Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Mayor, Councilman.
I totally agree with my good friend Harry Cohn, but in terms of timing, I think it's premature to say who needs to speak with CSX. Because as was stated over here by staff several times, until we do a current study, even though we've done 10 before, the times changed. We'll do a current study. Hopefully within a year, we'll have results. And then when we have results, we come to a consensus, probably with this whole body, come to a consensus on what we want to prioritize based upon the study. And then we can decide who leads that CSX.
No, I understand exactly about my point was who's going to be in charge of getting us to that.
Well, that's what that
was my question.
That's what this presentation is. I think, do we have money for that, David, to do the study, or are we looking for money to do the study?
T-BARTA has money that we are planning to use for this study.
Well, I will make a motion that T-BARTA does the study with DOT. Second. I mean, I want DOT involved, obviously.
There you go.
Okay. You want to call it?
No, you can.
Okay, all those in favor?
You make a motion?
Yes, because she walked in the room.
So we have a motion by Commissioner Starkey. Who made the second? Bob? Commissioner Baum. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
There you go.
There we go.
Okay, and then we'll get further down the road to your fellow commissioner's question. We'll solve that question. If we're able to move forward, hopefully so. Hopefully they drop that price.
So next item on the agenda is the regional needs for 2050. Chelsea, here you are.
Yes, here I am. Well, thank you all. I have the distinct pleasure of being the only person between you and lunch. So I'm actually, can you go to the next slide? I'll be very brief. So we've been talking a lot about who's going to lead this, what are the next steps, and I've been over there trying not to jump out of my seat and just start talking. So what we're proposing to you as staff for the TMA and the SCTPA we are actually all about to start developing the 2050 long-range transportation plan. This is not just another plan. This is something that we are already required to do. So what we'd like to propose is that we utilize this effort to carry on this conversation. Your meetings for the 2022 calendar and even beyond all the way through 2024, we would like to use those meetings to empower this group to be the one that leads the next long range plan, the identification of our needs, the identification of cost feasible projects to move this forward. In order for a project to get funded, it must be in the MPO's long range transportation plan. And if it's not in that plan, again, can't get funded and we can't even add it to a priority list. So the updating of the long range plan is kind of like the perfect time to identify what our priorities are, establish the need and the purpose for those projects so that it is then eligible for state and federal funding. Next slide. So this is the long range plan that the SCTPA, you all adopted last year. It has a 25-year planning horizon. It's required to be updated every 5 years. And it really identifies those major regional needs. Next slide. So the first step, we call this the regional needs assessment. The first step is, a data-driven evaluation of the area. What are the major travel patterns? A lot of this stuff we already have a really firm grasp on, but with the update of the plan, it does have to be done again. So we're going to be moving forward with this to identify where those major regional needs are from a data perspective, and also continue to engage the public moving forward. Next slide. So there's a whole lot of words on these slides. I'm not going to go over all of them, but we really just kind of wanted to bring this to you today to let you know, starting in March, we would like to start having this ongoing conversation with you. Each of the MPOs does contribute financially to the SCTPA and our work products. So we'd like to propose that we utilize that funding to help guide this regional needs assessment, the development of the next regional LRTP. We'll be engaging TBARTA on their regional rail assessment that they're going to be doing, and all that'll feed in nicely to the 2050 LRTP. So the projects that we identify, if we include them in the LRTP, then we'll have a project that we can prioritize, walk up to CSX and say, this is what we want to do with the corridor. Everyone's bought into it. These are the various components of it, and then we can start moving forward towards implementation. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but again, we'd like to keep this in front of you and keep this conversation going for the next couple of years.
I thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate it. And I actually thank everyone for coming here. Maybe any old business?
When you're ready, wrap up, I have 1 minute.
Okay. I was going to old business, new business, and whatever you want to say.
Well, for anybody who's interested, there is lunch available or gathering at World of Beer on Fowler for a group lunch. Since we are at that lunch hour, I'd recommend the sandwiches and perhaps not the beer if you're driving. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Starkey.
I just want to say I was having a discussion with my lobbyists, federal lobbyists with same as Pinellas County. And they did, and I'm sorry our Hernando County member left, but they did mention to me that the federal representative from Hernando County sits on the transportation committee. And that's not something we should take lightly, and that we should use him as an ally. So just wanted to bring that.
Do you have a recommended action that you'd like to?
Well, we don't have a plan yet, but since we have a plan, what's that?
Could we send a letter of support indicating that we're working on the plan, that we would love to keep his attention, or something along those lines?
Yeah, that's Daniel Webb.
Excellent.
He's on that transportation.
Okay. Is that coming from the Suncoast planning?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Do we need a vote for that? Could you make that a motion? We'll find a second.
Sure. I'll make a motion that we communicate with Representative Webster about our intentions.
Go ahead.
Is that
a second? Are you on the Suncoast? Let me just make sure. I need a Suncoast.
Yeah, he is now.
I am.
You are now?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Or I'll second it.
All right. You got, and a second by Commissioner Cohen. We'll go there. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And anything next? One more thing from Ms. Alden.
I just wanted to thank DOT again for the facilities and the AV support, and wonderful conversation. The interactive poll, thank you everyone for coming here from Tallahassee, and really appreciate the level of effort that you all put into making this a success. And I also wanted to welcome Bob Esposito, who's our new director from Fernando, and Ms. Adelie Grant, who I believe this is her first meeting with us, the CEO of HART.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Happy holidays and all the wonderful holidays that you scheduled. And we'll see you again in March. I see.